right, guys. Welcome back to Bitcoin Magazine Live's 41st show. This is pretty exciting. I'm here with Q of Bitcoin Magazine, our normal host, and we're talking to Jack Malish today, which is super exciting. Jack should be here shortly. We're also going to do, a Twitter Spaces, but if you're on YouTube, you're in the right place, or Twitch, because this is where we give away the free Bitcoin. So if you don't have the Earn Carrot app installed, go ahead and install the Earn Carrot app. There should be a QR code on screen. We're going to drop some free sats below. It's first come, first serve on the sats, guys. First one to enter the code into the Earn Carrot app wins. And as we wait for that, looks like Jack just arrived. We ready to bring him in?
Let's do it. Should we quick reminder to everyone, Jack is going to be one of the keynote speakers at Bitcoin 22 this year in Miami. We're going to have a long conversation with him about what it was like last year, what he's excited about this year as well. But if you want to be there yourself, use code YTMAG. Make sure you get yourself 10% off of tickets. And quick fun fact, if you actually buy it in Bitcoin, you get 33% off. So if you feel like the prices are too much, go ahead and pay for that in Bitcoin and you can get a bigger discount there. But let's take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to be joined by the legend himself, Jack Malish.
Sorry. So I
No, it's all good. It's all good.
From my computer and just mute myself.
No, for the spaces, you have to join from your phone.
Okay. Shit. Hopefully it all picks up. Oh no, is your guys' audio gonna just
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey guys.
Actually,
we are gonna go ahead. We're just doing a little bit of technical stuff to set up the Twitter spaces as well. If we can, we'll throw out some Bitcoin right now to keep you guys entertained while you watch three people who think they are technically adept prove how inept they are at technology.
Yeah, real quick, Jack, if you work your mute button on Spaces and keep yourself on mic on the Spaces, then they'll catch you there as well.
So I'm muted on Spaces.
Yeah. When you want to talk, just unmute on Spaces so they can get that audio as well.
Okay, so should I just hold these both right here? This is my
exactly.
Should I join the Zoom from my phone then, maybe? Or
no, I think you're good. I think
this will be fine. We'll be fine.
Yo, Q, pull me up.
Wait, are you not up? No, you are up.
The audio is the same, right, guys?
Yes, audio is the same. We just want to make sure that everyone who, for whatever reason, doesn't recognize or realize the fact that you can see us, all of our pretty handsome faces live on YouTube. For all you Twitter people, we'll be pitting at the top of this spaces a link to hop over to YouTube. We're going to be giving out some Bitcoin for free over there. We are also going to be rolling out for the first time ever a tipping function, thanks to Jack and Strike for helping us set that all up. So if you guys have been fans of the show for a while, feel free to pop on over to YouTube and check it out, because we've got some fun stuff cooking. And of course, you can see our pretty faces. Who wouldn't want that? But I do want to start, Jack, by saying first, thank you. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for the work that you do for Bitcoin. I mean, you have pushed the ball forward in this country, in El Salvador, and you continue to do it, man. I want to go way, way back with you. Can you talk to us a little bit about that orange pilling? Who did it? How was your initial gut reaction to Bitcoin? Were you did you dive head first, I believe in this, or were there some things you were skeptical about?
Talking about my personal story of being orange pilled? Oh man, all credit goes to my father. For those who don't know, my grandfather was former chairman of the Chicago Board of Trade, who some people associate with also my story. Unfortunately, he passed away before I was in middle school, so he was not alive. Well, some people think he's Satoshi or whatever. That's not true. But I grew up under a dad that ran a Chicago's futures brokerage. He was the son of the chairman of Chicago Board of Trade, futures trader, currency pit trader, and these Chicago guys got it right away. There was never a doubt in their mind. Chicago also has this really interesting culture that is counter to New York. My grandfather ran the Hunt brothers out of cornering the silver market and manipulating the silver market in the Chicago exchanges, and the Hunt brothers ended up manipulating the silver market in the New York exchanges. And that just kind of goes to show New York's very flashy, very money driven, manipulative markets, kind of shisty, shady, bald-headed, veiny motherfuckers. And Chicago guys are salt of the earth, true to their principles, their morals. They hold market integrity, and they're very honest about that. And so Bitcoin was extremely appealing for all of those reasons. It was kind of the currency of the people. They understood it. Chicago was a real market that founded agriculture derivatives and that risk transfer away from corn farmers. So not only did they get a currency that was global, a currency and a money that was for the people, but also one, they understood Bitcoin mining right away, right? Like they understood no one knows the corn farmer better than the Chicago pits. And so for all of those reasons, by the time I was dropping out of college, my dad was already accumulating, he was already stacking sats, and he was already orange pilling everyone in the house. And so, of course, I went through the same story everyone does is almost everyone, the second time you hear about Bitcoin is the time that you really get it. The first time is kind of like your initiation hazing phase of sorts. And you always have horror stories of if I would have understood it the first time. So I went through the same thing, man. I remember coming home from coding boot camp, and Andreas Antonopoulos was in my living room. And that was one of the first days that I really got it. So I'll stop ranting there, but very Chicago driven, very thankful for my dad. And for all of those that think I'm smart, it's not true. I just have a really, really kick-ass father, and that's the truth.
That's awesome. Shout out to Mr. Mahlers. Thank you for leading your son to the water, and he ended up fishing and helping everyone else out along the way. A couple of things I kind of want to touch on that you shared. Like I myself went to a coding boot camp, and I think that those things kind of get a bad rap, but you are very quickly now the poster child for the benefits of coding boot camp. I'd love to, like, what inspired you down that path? Was it Bitcoin that sent you down that rabbit hole? Was it life that sent you down that rabbit hole? Because that's not a normal option for everyone to take.
Yeah, all these answers, I hope they're what you're looking for, but they're very particular to me, if I'm being honest. I grew up, I've 2 state chess championships. I thought I wanted to be a professional chess player. And so I took some scholarship money to go to St. John's University. At the time, and still arguably to this day, New York is the chess capital of the world. And so I went, and yeah, every day of college, I would skip class. I was the worst student of all time. Didn't give a fuck, and violently made that apparent. And I would skip class, ditch it, and I would take the train into New York, and I'd play chess with the homeless in the parks every single day. And got to the point where I realized there was no such thing as a professional chess player. All professional chess players, unless you're like the world champion, have side gigs of teaching and such. It's just not very lucrative. The opportunity wasn't there. And it's not a very ambitious career. There wasn't a lot of impact on the world I could make. And so I came home 30 days into enrolling into college. So I didn't even get a college credit, wasted a ton of my dad's money. When I got home, my dad had a buddy who was an engineer at Apple. And we would play chess, and he was a smart guy, really good engineer, and thought he was a good chess player. And every time he'd come over, I'd beat him blindfold. This is a true story. And so my dad was really confused. He was like, dude, like, I'm trying to be a good parent here, man. Like, what the fuck is your problem? Like, your ACT scores are dog shit. You don't pay attention in class. You ditch. You're always in the dean's office, but then you're beating Apple engineers in chess blindfold. Like, I'm trying to understand, like, are you smart? Are you ambitious? Are you driven? Or are you like an idiot? And like, do you need to go to trade school? And my dad, the friend eventually was like, this kid needs to learn how to code. Like, it's not, school's not, like, he's not the problem. School's the problem. I think if Jack knew how to code, a lot of the things that he loves about chess and that he's good at with chess would maybe transpire. And so that is the dead honest truth of why I enrolled. I had no idea what Bitcoin was at the time. And it was all about just picking up a skill that overlapped with one of my passions and joys and ability to create. I think, if you ask chess players what chess is about, if you Google it, it's like, well, this is the rules and it's within the 64 squares. If you ask, if you walk into a New York chess club, what's chess about? It's the art of really seeing yourself forward. And yes, that includes calculations, that includes foresight, that includes vision, that includes ability to manage risk. And every chess move implies bad things and good things on the board, and your ability to manage the pros and cons and the best outcome for yourself given a single move. But it really is the art of moving forward, and in engineering it is that as well, and building tooling for the world digitally it is that as well. So it ended up working out, but it was more luck than happy chance. And yeah, that's the true story.
Jack, love it. Thanks for sharing that with us. I'll have to catch you on chess.com sometime. I'm sure you still love to play. So I had a quick lifestyle question before we jump into some of the Bitcoin stuff. I was just wondering, has Bitcoin influenced any of your daily routines, how you value your time? Like give me a day in the life of Jack Mollers, if you would.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin certainly, but also engineering as well. Writing software. There's a lot of overlaps in the two, in that simplicity is the challenge. There is no such thing as being a master of everything. And being master of one is difficult within itself. And so the difficult thing is not to try and accomplish 100 things. It's out of 100 things that you have an opportunity of attacking and accomplishing, what is the one that's most valuable and important? And your ability to delegate and dismiss the other 99 is actually what is required to live a high quality of life or build a high quality solution or do a high performance job. And so that implies, time preference changes, that implies difference of scope, that implies day in the life for me, I meditate a solid amount. I go on a lot of walks. I enjoy thinking. I enjoy conversing with people that challenge my ways of thinking. But I'm always optimizing for a simpler life. And then I also have this thesis that in the same way that you can't just wake up and win a marathon, you also can't just wake up and change the world. There's a sense of being in shape to accomplish these things. And in the way that you would train yourself to run a marathon, I actively think of training myself to have a really outsized impact on society, not claiming that I will and that, I am or anything like that, but I always aim to hope and carry that ambition that I could. And so my diet is extremely, extremely strict. Sometimes, I've actually been changing this a bit, but I used to run between 5 to 10 miles a day. My sleeping habits are very scientific. I just optimize every second of my, alive time. Being alive, being awake, being present is optimized around making sure that I'm quote unquote in shape with an ability to make an outsized impact on society that I think will be beneficial. So I don't really take any time off. It is important that not everything is Bitcoin focused, right? And that there is time for other things, but all of my life really is optimized around building tooling on top of Bitcoin and improving the world through the world's open monetary network. Fortunate that I'm 27 and that, there's a lot of, I don't have a family yet, right? Like I don't have a lot of life responsibilities that many others have, but it's a very scientific day in the life for me. It's all about just making progress.
I love that. I mean, it feeds into that old saying of you have to have the mentality of a millionaire before you are actually a millionaire. I want to ask this truly because our producer, Chris, and I were having this conversation last night, but when you talk about scientific sleep, are you like 8 hours before midnight? How many hours are you getting? Like, talk to us a little bit about that, because I think sleep gets overlooked in our industry, in our society.
Yeah. So at this very current stance right now, I'm actually flirting with a few different things. I've actually gone as far as trying to sleep in 4-hour increments that are spread out 3 times within a given 24-hour time frame. So there's been times where I've woken up at like 2 a.m. because my 4 hours is up, and then I'll work from like 2 to noon, and then sleep from noon to 4, and then and that there's science behind that. And I also think, like Jack Dorsey's been vocal about this, is that science is one of these interesting things that we frankly know close to nothing about how our bodies work. And a lot of science in relation to health has been a result of trial and error, and, calculable trial and error, and, not reckless trial and error, but nonetheless. And so I've tried that. Where I'm at now, an interesting thing I found tremendously helpful is the act of going to bed. I divide into 2 parts. It's the notion of entering the bedroom, which is an attempt to sleep. And then there's actually shutting your eyes and sleeping. And when I begin my attempt to sleep, actually, like, no phone, no devices. I give myself 30 minutes of just like turning off, so to speak. Think of it like the Xbox One. It took a second for it to dial itself all the way off. And so I think that that's really important, to shut off any stimulus to my body and to my psyche before I enter a realm of sleep. So that's been really helpful. I do a lot of red light exercises. So I have a red light that gets certain exposure to the back of my head at certain times of the day to optimize for performance. Like when I eat protein versus carbohydrates, I do carbohydrates a lot in the morning or before things like this, and towards the later night is when I will eat things like steak. So that all is informing in like how I sleep, when I meditate, and stuff like that. But again, it's all about I think optimizing and putting myself in a position to achieve what we want to achieve, which is pushing Bitcoin forward, and by that making the world a better place. So can't do that hungover, kids.
No, I love that. I mean, I myself am a big meditator. Jay Shetty and Thich Nhat Hanh are probably 2 of my favorite Buddhist teachers that I've had the opportunity to read a ton. I won't bore our viewers or listeners with that. I will probably steal you at the conference to pick your ear about some meditation stuff. But to bring it back to Bitcoin, and specifically the Lightning Network, the work you've done with Strike has changed the way exchanges are operating, and now everyone is responding to your work. Talk to us a little bit about the opportunity that you saw in Lightning and how you took advantage of it.
Yeah, it's funny enough. After this, I actually headed to the airport to talk about this with 60 Minutes. Everyone knows they're doing a piece on El Salvador and such. And it was funny because in some of the leading up to the interview questioning, they're like, why did El Salvador do this? Is the government has some political agenda, or is it because your grandfather was part of the Chicago exchanges? And I think the answer is that, it's just the most practical thing they could have done and that anyone could do. Bitcoin and Lightning is just very obviously a superior payments experience. Like, it just is. It would be the equivalent of me questioning, like, why the fuck is Google using the World Wide Web as their preferred way to distribute communications to the world? Why don't they just launch a newspaper? It's like, I don't know. I think that the global communication standard for the world that we know of as the internet is just a superior communication standard than like the standard of publishing newspapers. And so what I ended up like initially with Strike, which was formerly Zap, at the time was trying to aid and help with the block size war. It was about trying to humanize the Lightning Network and show that this tool could be scaled in layers and it was the correct approach, and that Lightning was not vaporware and it was real. A lot of the things that you may laugh at today on Twitter were real debate topics back in the day. And I was trying to humanize the thing and not let people read white papers and just allow people to feel it and experience it and click buttons and see how instantaneous and cheap it was. But then what you begin to realize is when I'm coding and testing with people, I'm sending payments to a guy in the UK instantly and for free as we're testing shit back and forth. All of a sudden you're realizing and someone is selling me a virtual coffee and there's no concept of MDR. There is no interchange. There's no settlement delays. And what I began to realize is I'm doing shit that Visa can't do. I'm doing shit that Western Union can't do. I'm doing shit that PayPal can't do. And it's an open network. And so every day I would wake up and there'd be more fucking people on this thing than there were yesterday. And then more than the day before, and then more, and then more, and then more. And as the more people that came on, the services that I was building were getting more valuable in the same way that like the University of Illinois web engineering class and kids are building websites is making Google a more valuable company. Google's not authoring that, not paying the University of Illinois to do that. They're just on an open network, which is the internet. It comes with these open network effects and economies of scale. And it was then I just realized this is a premier premium payments experience for the world. And it actually is going to dematerialize all of these independent, it's going to dematerialize radio and news in the same way that the internet dematerialized radio, newspaper publishing, pigeon messaging, telecom onto one standard. I think Visa, Western Union, remitting money, issuing banks, acquiring banks, all of that's going to get dematerialized onto one premium standard. The Lightning Network can do Western Union's job, Visa's job, JP Morgan Chase on the issuing side, Citibank on the acquiring side. It could do their jobs all better, all in one. And then the result of that is we'll have one global open standard for the world to compete for the experience. And then that's when I went through this mental exercise. I was like, shit, why is no one using this? It has to be for the experience, right? If you think back, sorry, this answer is getting long-winded, but if you think back to the internet, like people in these early relay chats on the web, the first iterations of the web, these were hacker tech enthusiasts. They were sending messages to each other across the world. And I'm sure people thought it was cool and demos were interesting, but no one liked that experience or thought that experience rivaled the newspaper. Little did they know that those bytes of data being sent from the US to Europe instantly, which is a new form of communication, would result in Google, which is indexing the world's information and communications network, or Facebook, which is a new way of social networking, or Instagram is a particular experience on top of the communication standard of the internet that is about sharing photos that are memories. Snapchat is about sharing photos in real time. All of a sudden you had, but no one at the time could envision that the early relay chats, those bytes of data, they could be messages, they could be photos, and now they could be money. Bitcoin lives within the communications channel that is the internet. It could be satellite, it could be radio, but no one in the early days of the web thought that we would dematerialize money on top of this communications channel, right? It's just, so it's a premium communication channel no one could see, right? And I think the same thing about Bitcoin and Lightning is that, like, who knows what an open global monetary standard that's premier and premium is going to result in. And I sat to myself and I was like, what is an interesting experience on top of it? What's an attractive experience? And I went through my own checklist. Like, I don't use Lightning enough because I don't like spending my own Bitcoin. I don't use Lightning because I don't like having to report it to the IRS. I don't use Lightning because of the volatility in Bitcoin. I don't use Lightning. Would I pay 1 penny to read a New York Times article? Yeah, if the headline was interesting. But would I load up a Lightning node and sell my Bitcoin for it? No, fuck no, I don't give a fuck. But if I could attach my Chase bank account and software took dollars out of Chase for me and then used a better monetary network to give the money on the other side of the world, or to a coffee barista, or to a publisher, yeah, I'd do it. And then that was the first version of Strike, was effectively, taking what Cash App is or what Venmo is and plugging Bitcoin and Lightning into it instead of like a closed monetary network. And so that's kind of like my evolution of thought summarized.
And so if we take that like to today, I mean, Strike has become, for me, it's the most seamless exchange to get Bitcoin on. I mean, I'm paid through Strike. I buy my Bitcoin in Strike. So my question to you is, what are the goals in your eyes now? Are we looking at expanding into Canada? Is there exciting software developments that you wanted to share today? What are you thinking about?
So the company Strike itself, we optimize around the best financial experience and the best financial brand. And so the reason we let you buy Bitcoin for free, the reason that we let you get paid in Bitcoin, the way I like to think about it is my daughter. So I'm 27 years old. So let's say my son or daughter by the year 2050 will be looking to bank. Where are they going to bank? Are they going to bank at the JP Morgan Chase down the street? No, I don't think anyone thinks they will, right? I think that's a kind of a universal. Even JP Morgan Chase is probably thinking about ways to bank them, and it's not their existing products and experience. Okay, fair enough. Now, here's where I think it's interesting. Are they going to bank at Chime? Because in 2017, Chime was the first to come up with 2-day early direct deposit. Guys, the year's 2050. My daughter's not going to give a fuck what Chime did in 2017. And that's a very easy feature to duplicate. Now Cash App lets you do it. Now Venmo lets you do it, right? So where is my daughter going to bank? I think my daughter is going to bank on the best experience and the best brand on top of the world's open monetary network. And it's not going to be like by the year 2050, everyone's going to be selling Bitcoin for free or whatever it costs for them to offer the service, right? Like the race to the bottom will be complete, everything. And so I think the real competition and value capture is in the experience in the global brand on top of the world's open monetary network. And I'm just taking lessons that we already learned from the internet. And so that's how we optimize every decision we make. And so when people think like, why are you offering buy Bitcoin? I'm building the best financial experience ever. Like here's what I want. I want my non-working capital that I intend to save, that is the future home I own, future tuition for my kids to get into Harvard, capital that I want to persist through time. I want to hold in Bitcoin. I want the ability to acquire that Bitcoin to be as cheap as possible, which is why we do it for free. And I want a variety of ways to do it. I want to get paid in it. I want to DCA it in the hour. I want to DCA it in the month. I want to be able to buy at spot when it dips. And that's why those things exist. Now, the capital that I need to spend to live the quality of life that I deem necessary for myself. So the money that I will not own by the end of the month, that I get paid every month and that leaves my ownership and into someone else's in exchange for goods and services like groceries or my phone bill or my rent. I think it should be interoperable over the Lightning Network. So I think I should have dollars or whatever cash collateral I'm comfortable with, interoperable and spendable over Lightning. And then I should be able to acquire Bitcoin as cheap as possible. And then even I should have like a debit card that allows me to use my Bitcoin that I'm stashing as collateral, and I can loan against it and essentially get free, borrow money for free. Borrowing money right now is free. And I get paid in Bitcoin. I use that Bitcoin to lever up and essentially get free credit to spend. And all of this is interoperable over Lightning. And so I'm building for the year 2050. I think there's going to be a lot of people that want to have that financial experience. And so that's kind of how we optimize around it. I think some of the interesting takeaways for this financial experience is it's inherently global. So this monetary network is interoperable naturally with anyone in the world that's interoperable with it. And so we want to launch in as many countries as we possibly can. I think a big point on Lightning right now is the acquiring side, is that there aren't a lot of merchants that are on, not enough. And so I think someone needs to become a Shopify partner. Wink, wink, right? Like someone needs to integrate the big coffee merchants of the world. Someone needs to get into the big online marketplaces of the world and allow that interoperability. And the last thing I'll say is that that's actually really important, is that the point, guys, isn't that Strike is taking over. The point is one network is going to defeat Western Union, Visa, all of these together, one network. But the network has to consist of many participants. And so my goal right now is growing interoperability, hopefully Cash App keeps going, right? And getting Amazon interoperable with Lightning and getting Shopify merchants interoperable with Lightning. Because then what you'll see is that, yes, you could use Strike, but you could also use Blue Wallet. You could also use a node on Tor. You could also use Cash App. And it's the consumer's choice and a free market competition on top of an open network. You're going to start to see a renaissance of innovation for the consumer. And that's what we saw with the internet. Like, how do you use the web? Chrome or Safari? There's no right answer. There's the consumer choice, the consumer preference. And if Chrome starts requiring you to do 100 setups before you can open a new tab, you'll just use Safari, right? So they're beholden to you as a consumer, where today Chase is not beholden to me. Western Union is not beholden to me. And in an open network scenario, they are. So it's kind of how we think about things. I gave a few hints without being too transparent or spilling any beans, but yeah.
Love it. Appreciate that. I just want to give a quick reminder. People are requesting to come on stage because we're kind of simulcasting this. We're going to keep questions closed for now, but please feel free to join us on YouTube. We're dropping some stats in the chat as we go through this conversation, and I'll pass it to Q from here.
There we go. I love everything you've been saying. I mean, in your interview with McCormick, you kind of touch on this a little bit as well, where you bring up how, look, the user experience for the banking system is not conducive to people, but the user experience for Strike and Bitcoin is going to shift that focus. But you're not even focused on like, I don't want all the market share. I actually want competition to come in, because competition will breed us and make us all better. Talk a little bit about how you work together with Cash App. Block released the Lightning Development Kit. My assumption is that you spoke with them or had something, given the fact in your experience with Lightning. talk about the camaraderie that goes on between these companies a little bit, please.
Yeah, I mean, I like, to be clear, they're so good at everything. And there's no credit to be dealt my way at all. I mean, my communication with them is because I'm a peer on the same network, and there's a level of communication that exists between us and everyone else. Blockstream, I mean, other Bitcoin companies, right? Like, we're just trying to all come to levels of consensus, march this thing forward, and continue adoption because it's a superior experience. So that's, I mean, my relationship with everybody. But yeah, so the point is an important one. Think about this. There's not one internet company. In fact, let's go through that mental model. What if Google was the only internet company? It'd be worth nothing because there'd be nothing to search, right? Like, it's important to think. I know intuitively the thought is, oh, this guy's coming in to be the new Jamie Dimon. He's swindling you. He's wearing hoodies and he's cursing and he says he smokes weed because he wants you to think he's cooler than Jamie Dimon, but he's really in here to be the new Jamie Dimon. No, the fuck I'm not. Like, being on a network implies other network participants. If Google was the only internet company, it would be worth jack shit. Internet companies any network, new network participants are additive. Think about a closed network. New Venmo users are additive to the Venmo network. That's more people to pay. That's more people to request. It's the same in an open network. Anyone that joins the network adds value. And so the thesis is that there's not one company that can defeat all of these people at the same time. Listen, if I could walk into Starbucks and check out with Western Union, they would offer that. If Visa could remit money and compete with Western Union on remittance, they would offer that. They can't, right? If radio could also publish newspapers, if telecom could also stream video, they would. There became one global standard named the internet that dematerialized it all, but it required many network participants to build all sorts of experiences on top of it. And it was the participants on top of one single standard for the world that won. And so the whole point is that's why a lot of my time now is spent doing shit like this, like driving this message home, encouraging people to come on, because think about it, guys, the value that's going to leak out of the financial sector, there's going to be tens of trillions of dollars up for grabs. And this is what happened with communications. And so people are always like, who is the next Google? Who's the next Facebook of the crypto industry? Fuck the crypto industry. It's who's going to build the best experiences and the best brands on top of the Bitcoin monetary network. And those are going to be the ones that capture the value that leaks out of the existing financial sector today. And so that's kind of how we think about it. And so like when Cash App comes on, that's amazing. So if you're saying JP Morgan's going to die, Western Union's going to die, Visa's going to have to sacrifice a lot of market share, and the winners are going to be Block and Strike, I'm going to be a fucking $5 trillion company, right? Like, what do I have to be mad about? And so my point is there's like so much room for everyone to win. That's part of the whole thesis. And so for people that think my single company is out to defeat Visa and Western Union at the same time, Western Union can't defeat Visa themselves. Visa can't defeat Western Union themselves. And they're both bigger than me. So thinking that I could do it doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. It's a collective network. So hopefully that makes sense.
It absolutely does. I mean, you say it without saying it, but in essence, you are trying to disrupt the entire global financial and monetary system that's in place. You've sat with the IMF. You have Jamie Dimon trying to do anything under the sun, under his powers and abilities to inhibit you or the development of Bitcoin. I'd love to just give you the chance right now, like, say it to the camera, say it to Jamie Dimon's face. Like, what would you tell him that he's doing wrong, or what is he thinking incorrectly about Bitcoin?
I wouldn't even say I personally see the world being a better place. If Bitcoin was the monetary network for the world, I think the world would be a better place. I think society would function better. I think human freedoms and a lot of liberties would be reinstilled and protected, and that there'd be a renaissance of innovation for financial services and experiences. And so that's why I personally believe that, but it's actually not my mission to own. I think it's Bitcoin that is dematerializing the monetary energy and monetary functions as a whole. And I think the way to think about it is the competition is going to live on top of this global layer, like we saw on the internet, for the experiences. And so what I would say to Jamie Dimon is, let's play ball. Stop being a pussy. Come play, come compete. Like, that is what we want. We want the work. We don't want, like, I can't compete with Chase Bank right now because it would take my whole life to get a federally chartered license. That guy would lobby me in DC till I couldn't breathe anymore. But if we have an open monetary network, we have an open standard to achieve finality in payments, then yeah, if Chase is still the biggest company 100 years from now, that implies that they built a tremendous experience on top of the world's open monetary network. They figured it out. They figured out the compliance, the accounting, the engineering, the user experience for all of that. And kudos to them. But those should be the winners, those that are building experiences that provide true value to the consumer. Because here's the very subtle but like important change that happens here is that all of a sudden the consumer dictates the market winners, not regulators, not Washington, D.C. And so if you like a financial experience better, you can leave Chase. You don't have to have Chase anymore. And you can exist and be interoperable with the world financially and getting your paycheck, spending money, receiving money, paying your friends. You could do it on your own terms. And then that's when we see innovation, is because you cannot lobby Washington, D.C. You better build a feature that someone else built, or you better have better customer support, or you better figure out your accounting structure so you stop failing audits, you know? And so my message to everyone, Western Union included, get interoperable on the network and let's compete, let's play ball. Because whether I win, you win, the world will be a better place for it. And so it's not my mission, it's Bitcoin's mission. And my mission is to be competitive on top of the network. And so that's what I would say. But I would just say, stop being a fucking coward, man. Like, stop going to Washington, D.C. Like, these politicians aren't going to help you forever. Like, let's just play ball for the betterment of our species. Let's play. May the best man win. Stop being a little girl about it.
You heard it, Jamie. Quit being a little bitch. Hang on one second. Okay. So I do want to ask you now, you've brought up DC a little bit. Obviously, Jamie Dimon is going to do whatever he wants to do, but there's also a contingent of Bitcoiners who have started to make pushes with different people who are in DC and people who are running to be in DC. We see Cynthia Loomis out of Wyoming making big pushes and big legislative efforts. What are you interested in seeing DC actually do in regards to Bitcoin?
Oh, muted by host. Are you guys want me on the...
I just wanted to mute you for a second to avoid the echo.
You're good. Okay. Yeah. In regards to DC, I think it's my personal opinion. You take it for what it's worth. Think it's valuable. Great. If not, whatever. My personal opinion. I think that there needs to be regulatory clarity on this space as a whole. Like, when I have conversations with really big merchants, really big companies, the level of regulatory clarity from bodies like the SEC is not enough. And people are going to freak out like, oh, you're pro regulation. Why do you need the SEC to tell you what's a security or what's not? Fuck off. Here's what's happening. The Federal Reserve is perverted risk tolerance across all assets. And here's what I mean by that. No one knows the price of anything anymore. Like, the rate of it, no one even knows the true rate of inflation right now. And no one can now save in dollars, whether you know that or whether you're on TikTok and you're seeing the guy with the nice car is the one that bought AMC at the right time. It is implied through human behavior, through societal behavior, and just through mathematics that you have to hold other assets if you want to preserve and retain wealth. Okay, how do I make money on that if I'm Andreessen Horowitz? Well, I collect money from LPs and I sell Web3, Pink Coin, Subway footlong coin as a new savings account. In fact, those sounded crazy, didn't they? Subway footlong coin sounds crazy. What if I told you cartoon drawings of a monkey drooling on itself? Which one sounds crazier? One of those is actually working, right? Okay, so my problem is I've always described altcoins as an arbitrage on the trend. They're arbitraging, that's an informational arbitrage that the Federal Reserve, central banks has effectively kicked everyone out of saving in dollars. Everyone's effectively homeless. And here you have really advanced, sophisticated salesmen selling tents as Malibu mansions on the beach. But as soon as it rains, you're going to be homeless again. And that's what I describe as NFTs, as altcoins, as shit coins. And it's a fucking mess. And so it's an informational arbitrage, is that everyone's getting kicked out. Everyone's homeless. Everyone needs a place to live. And people are out here selling tents as mansions, as homes. And so that's information. It's an unprecedented demand to save and no knowledge of how to do it, because the tried and true tested time is you open a savings account. That is robbed now from the everyday person. The other arbitrage is a regulatory arbitrage. If I had to sell you a new savings account and it wasn't dollars, it wasn't federally licensed from a federally chartered bank, and it wasn't property like real estate or Bitcoin, then I would have to violate securities law. That is just what's happening. It is a very clear violation of securities law. And so that's why when I say it's an arbitrage on the trend, it's an arbitrage in two ways. It's an informational arbitrage where you're taking advantage of people, where my dad had 5% overnight interest when he was my age. You put $100 in a savings account, you wake up, you have $105. Now you put $100 in a savings account, they're going to take from you more than it yields. Okay. So everyone is kicked out into the street, homeless. They don't know where to go. And there are people selling them pictures of monkeys as a place to live. And so that's an informational arbitrage. And the regulatory arbitrage is previously that is violently illegal, but now we have a new asset class that doesn't have the regulatory clarity. And so if the argument is the free market's going to work itself out, I mean, come on, guys. Like, people are kicked out and homeless because of the monetary expansion from central banks and the high rates of inflation. I mean, it'd be the equivalent of like putting a toddler out on the street. I mean, these people are going to get hit by cars and kill themselves. And if that's your opinion of the free market going to work itself out, and it may take 25 years and a lot of people are going to die and it's going to be gruesome and it's going to be bloody and people are going to get away with buying Manhattan penthouses by selling pictures of monkeys, okay, fine. Or the SEC could do their job and say that's a security. So I just would like to see a little bit of regulatory clarity, because I think these people are getting taken advantage of. And so when it comes to Washington, D.C., and I think we're getting there. And you know, Cynthia Loomis and everyone, I'm very grateful for their work that they're putting in. Pro Bitcoin, Bitcoin is very clearly, it is a big bang type of event. It's very clearly different than these other assets. It's very clearly property, in my opinion. And I would like to see a little bit more clarity, so that if you are an S&P 500 company that wants to get into this space and wants to be interoperable with the Lightning Network, we know how to account for it. We know how to apply licensing to it. We just need a little bit of clarity and a little bit of protection for the retail investor that's been kicked out of savings accounts and is running around into AMC stock and into pink coin, trying to save themselves and getting absolutely murdered.
So, Jack, what is the most vulnerable part of, you know, the Lightning Network and Bitcoin as it pertains to like clown world, mainstream media, you know, the SEC? Like, what are the attack vectors there? Do you see any threat at all, or are we just completely orthogonal to those systems?
No, I think we need to, I just would be careful. Like, for example, like people, think it's like a secret. It's not. Strike is a regulated financial institution. We require KYC. And so we are subject to regulatory bodies. Like, if regulatory bodies, here's my thing is that if we, for example, optimize the Lightning protocol to be handshakes between web servers, what happens when someone does lobby Washington, D.C., and now there's a Lightning Network bit license, right? And that if you want to be a centralized Lightning Network provider, that you need to go through all sorts of bit license and regulatory checks and such. Like, that is something that can exist for centralized services. So I'm always like, we need to build these things to be resilient and to last. People don't appreciate that Bitcoin is also important because of its censorship resistant properties, and not only censorship resistant in that they can't change the monetary policy, but you cannot regulate a true distributed network. And so I think it's important, inevitably, if the blocks and the strikes and the whoever's of the world do pose big threats to Visa and JP Morgan Chase, they will lobby in DC, but it's important that that doesn't kill the whole network, right? Like, we aren't the network. The network, we need to build the network in a way where in which, some developer in the coast of Australia who builds a wallet in their basement is just as interoperable as Strike. And maybe Strike has to go get some extreme licensing, or Strike has to abide by some crazy thing in the United States, but that doesn't have impacts on the protocol itself. And so I'm always like, when it comes to LNURL or the evolution of the bolts, I'm always thinking of it in a way like, what's the long-term viability and health of the network? Because I think these QR codes, again, are going to exist for my daughter in 30 years. And I think it's really important that we keep that in mind. We don't optimize for the next few quarters or the next few years, and we ensure that it's resilient. So as long as it's resilient to that level of attack, I would feel very confident, but that's nothing that you can actually achieve in finality. That's just an iterative process where, as long as the community has consensus that that is one of the many goals, we just always have to keep that in mind as we build shit.
So what are some of the hurdles you face in bringing Strike to Europe or, Brazil, for example? I mean, places that are just begging for an app just like yours.
Yeah, it's just regulatory. I mean, to be clear, it's not legal to in most jurisdictions. Every jurisdiction is different stuff, but usually it's not allowed to custody assets on behalf of a consumer, so be a custodial service. And then especially the interfacing with fiat currency is tremendously difficult. And that ranges from regulatory compliance, accounting. And so it's just a mix of it all. And then of course the user experience and interfacing, like ACH is different from IBAN, which is different from FastPay. And there's different internal banking structures depending on the jurisdiction. So it's definitely a lot of hard work, but I think what people maybe don't appreciate is I know everyone's very excited and I know everyone's eager, but think about it this way, guys, like in the year 2050 that I keep referencing, are we going to look back and be like, fuck, Strike didn't launch in Europe in 2021, it launched in 2022? Like, no, I mean, right. Like we're going as fast as we can. And we're building shit that's going to last. That's another thing too. There's no reason for us to take shortcuts, in my opinion. And so I think when it's all said and done in hindsight, it will all have moved collectively a lot faster than people have assumed, but it's a combination of all the above. All your intuitions are very likely correct.
I want to selfishly ask about my own personal intuition. I'm assuming that because of legislative efforts in the US, or requirements, I'm sorry, that's why I have to each time deposit cash and then go buy Bitcoin rather than just outright buying Bitcoin. Does that mean that the legislators want you to essentially call yourself a bank, or what is that hurdle here stateside that's preventing that?
No, that's just a very particular product thing that will get resolved in the near term. I mean, the Strike, we're kicking ass, man. There's the product has gotten so much better because maybe I stopped working on it. Everyone here is really good at engineering a product, at UX design. Our customer support teams really kicking ass nowadays. So I say all that to say that I think we're a lot bigger than people maybe assume. And there's a ton of shit coming. We're going to resolve of that. The interesting insight, just like behind the scenes of the actual story, is the difference between, let's say, a Venmo and a Strike is that Venmo controls their monetary network. So they can debit your ACH, attempt to make a payment for whatever reason, like it may fail. Like they can control the P2P-ness. But when you are dealing with the Lightning Network is a network that you don't yourself control. So how do you debit money from someone? The Lightning Network payment fails. How do you refund them? And at the time, I was just like, fuck, that sounds complicated. And so I didn't build it. But it's actually actively being built now. And that's just, thanks to the fact that there's an amazing team behind me now. And I'm just a sleazy salesman nowadays.
I had to ask the CEO of my favorite Bitcoin buying company how we could fix one of the things that I'd like to see change. But talk to us a little bit about the growth of Strike. You guys, you started this company yourself. You built it up. It really got on an international stage, I would say, off of the heels of the El Salvador stuff. What was the growth leading up to that, and what's the growth been like out after the El Salvador news?
Growth has been off the charts, and what I mean by that is like I'm very pleased with it. I'm very pleased with it, and yeah, I mean, I guess we've been pretty close to the chest about it because it doesn't really benefit us. When you run a business, you want to always optimize success of the business, right? If you are very clear with what you're optimizing for, it becomes very easy to make what is seemingly complicated decisions. If you know what success looks like, you can work yourself backwards from that. And so we haven't really been very public about our growth or our investors or how many employees we have, just because so far it hasn't really, been attractive. It wouldn't add any value to the company. But from a high level, I feel very confident. The life cycle of a startup, at least from my own experience, is you have an idea to a proof of concept to what I consider to be a hackathon, trying to find product market fit. But then there's this evolution of becoming a corporation, and we're optimizing and scaling ourselves into a company where I think we can be very competitive with Visa, with JP Morgan Chase, with PayPal, and that's how we're building ourselves. And I think people would be shocked to see how close we really are. Not to say we're on par. We have a lot of work to do, but we're a lot closer than people think. And maybe over the next few months, I think there'll be some stories or some insight into that. But generally happy, super happy.
Love that. And I don't want to take away from the exciting announcements I know you and the team have been working very hard on. Can you talk a little bit and maybe share some more about how El Salvador came to be for those who maybe aren't as familiar with the story? I myself will never forget being in the auditorium when you made the announcement. Talk to our viewers a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah. Oh, the story itself. I mean, like all the credit goes to Bitcoin Beach. That was the whole reason I went down there in the first place. And there's bits and pieces that are really fun, man. Like I was, the whole story of I was in a sushi restaurant when I got a DM on Twitter. That's all true. It's actually really funny. I have all the footage. As soon as I thought that this was going to be real, I called my friend Peter McCormick, and we were just reviewing the footage yesterday, funny enough. And all the stuff is documented. And it's a lot of fun. But no, the essence of it is, again, I think 20 years from now, my kids aren't going to be like, why the hell did El Salvador opt to use Bitcoin as a financial tool instead of the IMF, Dad? That doesn't make any sense. They're not going to say that. It's going to sound like the most logical thing ever. They're going to be like, oh, here's a money that's harder than anything that's ever existed, that costs nothing to acquire and participate into this monetary system, and that's free of any adversaries, any intermediaries, any strenuous relationships, especially for an underprivileged, underdeveloped market and government and country like El Salvador. And here's a monetary network that's just a superior payments experience, that's open, that's inclusive, that invites free market competition. And so I think it was just like a very natural progression of what it makes intuitive sense. And I'm just like there's a clip that maybe gets released with 60 Minutes where I'm driving back from one of the meetings. I'm just thankful for the role I played, is what I said at the time. And I still feel it to the day. It's like, it has nothing to do with me as an individual. I don't take any more credit for anything. I just happened to be there. I happened to have launched Strike. I happened to have been making tangible progress on what turned out to be a more collective mission. I remember looking at the camera and being like, I promise on behalf of El Salvador, on behalf of this community, on behalf of our species, I'm not going to let us down. I saw that as like a very pivotal moment for humanity, almost as like the first stepping stone into what is a more prosperous society and humanity and universe. And so I felt I did what I was asked to do by the universe. And that was it though, man. That was it.
You answered its call and you hit it out of the park, man. I will always say thank you, because you really pushed it forward in a way that I don't think anyone thought possible until it finally happened. What's that old saying of it's impossible until it's done? So thank you again for that, man. I want to now, we've talked a lot about this here, decentralization. It's impossible to talk about Bitcoin without it. If anyone who's watching or listening on Twitter has not had a chance, you have to go and watch Peter McCormick's latest episode with Jack, titled Jack Orange Pilling the IMF. Go watch that story. We don't need to regress on that, but talk to us a little bit about just how you explain to the IMF the benefits of the decentralized network. Maybe just like a bullet point or two on some of the things you brought up in that presentation.
Yeah, you should go watch it. It's public, and it's a reference to a true story. But effectively, the way I had broke it down to some gentlemen in a different instance was I used tortilla chips, raisins, and peanuts. And what I was able to illustrate is people don't appreciate how many intermediaries and all the required costs that go into conducting a financial transaction today, because effectively we're talking about paper bills, and money now has turned into credit. And how does all of this get settled and achieved? And where's the sense of finality come from, and who all is involved? Like when Visa charges 2.9% to clear a transaction, they don't collect all 2.9%. They share that with hundreds of other financial intermediaries. And so what I was able to illustrate is I drew in tortilla chips, raisins, and peanuts. I was able to draw what exists today. And you can imagine a line of infinite tortilla chips and all of these sunken costs on top of them. And sunken costs, again, people, it's not intuitive to understand. Western Union has a lot of rent to pay. In order for their business to work, they have to have a brick and mortar shop many of them in like 200 countries. That's a very expensive fixed cost. Whereas if I can distribute money to someone's cell phone, I don't have any of those costs at all. That implies that my service could be cheaper than theirs, right? And so then you start to kind of knock down. And then what I did is I took this row of tortilla chips and raisins, as you can visualize them. And it was very burdensome, very heavy. There's all these raisins and chips and crumbs all over the place. And then I picked up a peanut and I said, this peanut can actually do the job of all these tortilla chips and raisins. And I may sound crazy to those that are unfamiliar with the story, but in essence, what I'm saying is that Bitcoin can actually accomplish the job that collectively Western Union, Visa, JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, credit unions, the Federal Reserve, that they all do together in unison, which results in a lack of human freedoms financially throughout the world, which results in high fees, which results in slow delays, which results in unfair markets, which results in Washington, D.C. being protective over innovation, which results in. And I was saying this peanut can do it all. And don't think of it as like we have to ditch dollars or ditch, like it's not about like being libertarian and telling the Federal Reserve to fuck themselves. It's actually about the peanut can dematerialize all the middlemen. And then the world that we'll end up living in is very similar to the internet, is those that can build the best experience for people to interface with peanuts will win. And if that means interfacing dollars over peanuts, which is Bitcoin for those that don't know, great. And that's a great experience. And someone makes $1 billion that way, good for them. If you realize that the market isn't open to that and Strike's idea of that being useful is invalid and dumb, well, then someone will build interfacing with Starbucks points. Someone will build toenails over Bitcoin. Someone will build whatever, but you get this really renaissance of innovation of competing for the experience on top of a premium monetary standard and layer. But my message to them is that if we want to optimize for a more inclusive financial society and world, reinstilling basic human freedoms, increasing innovation, lowering costs, increasing accessibility, this is the best tool we got. I give a fuck all if you think the Fed is good or bad. I give a fuck all if you want to own Bitcoin or not. As a tool, you just can't debate that. And that point was received really well. And it was really exciting. And I think it's an interesting way to think about it. And competing for experiences with the tool is going to be, one of the better, times to be alive. The consumer is going to be fucking like, it's going to be like they're showered in gifts. There's gonna be all these new services. I mean, how many Lightning apps do you have on your phone right now? Right. And think about when it really picks up. It's gonna be all these ways to enhance your life financially because it's on an open system that's superior to what exists today. So.
I love that. I mean, it really is about this next iteration being, sorry, real quick. Okay. It's really going to be about iterating for the consumer, not prioritizing your profits, not prioritizing your bottom line. I do want to push back on something because this gets brought up and I go back and forth on it myself. The idea that eventually we will lead to a Bitcoin standard where countries, businesses, or whatever will essentially have Bitcoin backing whatever their currency is. Do we not find ourselves though in exactly the same place we were post World War II in a scenario like that? Or does it allow, given Bitcoin's deflationary aspect, give us a little bit more headway and clearance into this future world that you're describing?
Well, I think I'm trying to mute myself on the spaces. I think what's interesting, this is more a direct comparison, in my opinion, to gold. I think this is the comparison here to be held is to gold, and Bitcoin's superior to gold as a reserve asset because it's like, even let's look at what's happening in Canada right now, like the ability to easily privately secure and store Bitcoin as an asset or as property is amazing. Like imagine backing dollars with real estate. Imagine backing dollars with gold. It's very difficult to transport. It's not as easily as divisible. It's not as easy to store. It's very expensive. Gold is incites violence in the way that it's very easy to confiscate by ways of violence and threat. And so I think Bitcoin is superior in that sense. And then I also think that there's a game theory incentive that plays out within nation states, that those that optimize for proof of reserves, again, like I think if we learn anything from the internet, it's that the best experience and the best brands win. And we're even seeing that at a nation state level with El Salvador, with now tourism's up 30%. They're providing a superior experience and a superior brand to humans, and humans are receptive to that. And the consumer choice is seen and heard, and the fact that all of their numbers are now up. And so I think in the same way that PayPal and Block are going to compete over the experience and the brand on top of the world's open monetary network, so will nation states in that sense. And I think the reason that that's viable and it's different is because Bitcoin is a superior reserve asset to gold. And so that's why I think it's different. And that's how I like to think about it, is it's this open system, and the experience and the brand will end up triumphing and winning, and people should optimize for that.
It makes sense. I don't hate what you're saying. I fear that the hard drive wallets will be more easily confiscatable than gold, just because people are just going to hold them. I look forward to being so absolutely wrong about that, and you running laps in circles around me laughing about this concern and fear in the future. I do want to ask you, you brought up the issues going on up north in Canada, and we're seeing in real time the importance of a decentralized network. We're seeing the importance of not having control over shutting down access points. There are still on and off ramps that are viewed by the government up north in Canada. Talk to us about the differences and how, like, maybe a little naive, and forgive me for the question, but for example, is Strike under the US jurisdiction, are they an on and off ramp for Bitcoin that is viewed, or that the government can turn around and say, like, let us know who your users are? And talk to us a little bit about the importance of knowing and not knowing.
Yeah, I mean, listen, man, like Strike is a regulated financial service, right? So like we are just like, so is Cash App, so is Coinbase, so is Kraken. The importance though is that we're interoperable with this network. And so maybe people have used Strike to, donate, maybe they haven't, I have no idea. And I think the important takeaway though, as it relates to Bitcoin in Canada, is exactly that, is that you now have an asset and a monetary network that could be used in a censorship resistant, decentralized. Also, it's important that people take advantage of the privacy aspects and characteristics and properties that come with the system, and that you have a monetary system and a monetary experience that is sufficient and that lives external of any central body or any central party. And that's the takeaway. And it may sound mundane and it may sound repetitive, but that's the truth. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this is I look at what's happening in Canada as potentially as material as something like what we saw with UASF and Segwit 2X. My hope is that we can look back at this as a tried and true chapter that proves that Bitcoin was resilient in the face of what is being considered like, a government acting, whatever. I'm reluctant to give like outlandish political views and stances. That's not my job. But I think Bitcoin has an opportunity to really prove itself. And I think it already is, and we'll improve on it. It seems like people could be using it more privately and it'll iterate and improve. But I think that this is pretty fucking cool. Is like in the same way that Strike on top of Lightning can be better than Western Union and Visa, Bitcoin right now is better than any other tool at providing Canadians the financial services that they're being deprived of. And so there's no other tool in the world. And that's where you see true value, not white papers and shit. So,
Are there any specific improvements or BIPs that you're looking at that you advocate for, or upgrades to Lightning as well?
in regards to like privacy and shit, or just generally the privacy stuff?
Yeah, either. Yeah, both.
I mean, like obviously for Strike, for myself, for privacy, like I'm big on Bull 12 and a lot of the stuff happening in Lightning. I'm big on what Steve Lee has brought up recently, and the potential of using BIP 21 as some universal standard. Potentially, I actually don't know where I land on that. I'm big on, so yeah, Bolt 12 for me is one of the bigger ones, or just optimizing Lightning. I think Lightning is here to stay. It's pretty clear. And just the ongoing work in optimizing the protocol to be successful, but also retain the properties that make it important and allow it to survive. So that's where a lot of my focus is when it comes to like protocol specs and stuff like that, is trying to ensure that we make a resilient, private, open monetary network and enable good experiences on top of it.
Just a heads up, our spaces just got rugged. So I guess we can focus on the YouTube side of things. Yeah, that makes sense to me, man. That's where your head's at. Q, do you have maybe final thoughts, last questions here before we take too much of Jack's time?
I'm so mad at Twitter per usual, but I do want to ask a couple things real quick, Jack, to put you on the spot a little bit. If you could genuinely change one thing about the Bitcoin network, what would you change?
Oh, dude. I don't think anything, but it's because that's the whole point. I guess the thesis of the question is if you could go back in time maybe or something, but I think the point of Bitcoin is that it can't change. This is going to be fucking a wild thing to say, but hear me out on this thought. This is a thought that I've had recently that I've used to explain Bitcoin to family and friends. I think of Bitcoin. I like the phrase that I tweeted not too long ago is that Bitcoin can change the world because the world cannot change Bitcoin. And that's a very powerful concept. That has nothing to do with the price. That has nothing to do with the fact that it's superior payments. This is grounded in the idea that Bitcoin is a definitive, it's a variable that has been defined. This is a mathematic concept where you cannot solve 2 plus X equals Y. That math problem is unsolvable. But if you define Y as 4, we can spend time resolving of X. And the way I like to think about it is, the phrase, are you familiar with the only promise with life is death? Are you familiar with this concept?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Right. What does that actually mean? I think death is really important because it actually gives value to our lives. Time within itself is an infinite asset. There is no supply cap on time, and time alone is not valuable. And if our lives had unlimited time, it's unclear how valuable our lives would be. I wouldn't have to go to the gym today. I wouldn't have to get married. I wouldn't have to reproduce. It's actually the guarantee and promise of death that values our lives. And the way I like to think about Bitcoin is one giant big bang of a promise. It's the first monetary promise that's ever existed in the universe. And so in the same way that death allows us to value our lives, I think Bitcoin allows us to value the monetary energy in the universe. It's the first defined. Money has forever been 2 plus X equals Y, right? It's impossible to value the monetary energy that exists in the universe because there's never been this concept of death. There's never been a finite resource that encompasses the monetary energy, that encompasses the time that we spend alive. Does that make sense? And so I wouldn't change anything because it is this big bang-esque event. And I'd go as far to say that now there are 2 promises that you are born with into this universe: the promise of death and the promise of Bitcoin. And think about like the way society is able to optimize around these promises and the way that you're able to optimize around unsolved variables in a math equation. As long as as long as the end is defined, right? And so as long as we know there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin, we can rebuild societies, time preferences, human relationships. We can build structures wholly predicated on the guarantee that the world cannot change Bitcoin. This is an architectural foundation that we can build upon. And I think if you think about how we've optimized our lives around the promise of death, it's very apparent. And so how are we going to optimize our species around the promise of Bitcoin? So I like to think of it that way. And I have no desire to change Bitcoin because I think that in essence it's bigger than price. It's bigger than payments. It's like a foundational architectural block that our species can build upon within the universe. And if death values our lives, I think Bitcoin values the monetary energy that exists.
I heartily agree with you there. I mean, Bitcoin's often talked about as like some kind of like financial measure, or finally we have, an unwavering measure, but it's not just that. I mean, it's the only objective set of facts that we have as a species that we can all look at and agree upon, that's transparent and immutable for the most part. So, like in my eyes, this is the only path forward for humanity. It's the only thing that's going to get us through, the great filter. It's the only thing that's going to allow us to fund important scientific achievements, such as, spreading out as a species interplanetarily and, so on. So I'm really excited you brought that up.
Yeah, I just think it's an interesting way to think about Bitcoin is that yes, it's a hard money and it should appreciate against everything because it's harder than everything. And we're seeing that play out. And yes, it's a superior payments experience. And so, people should opt to use it, and it should dematerialize a lot of the financial experiences. But more so than both of those, it's the first truly definitive monetary variable that's ever existed in the universe. And you can leverage that to build societal structures and human relationships. And really truly value and encompass monetary energy that exists in a way that is impossible before. So I think more than anything, it's just very bullish our species and our ability to build monetary tooling on top of something that we can rely on. It's the only monetary property asset network that we can solely rely on and we know won't change. That's ever existed, by the way. And so I don't like, it's crazy to me that people aren't interested in it. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think they just need their 3-4 touch points. Sometimes it takes a little more. We'll just subsume them from a decentralized stance, and everyone won't even know they're using Bitcoin eventually. I mean, the first children who are raised on a Bitcoin standard they're already being raised. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it'll work itself out. And I always thought it was interesting the way Satoshi designed the monetary policies. There's always been a very blatant incentive to reward earlier participants, right? Like the way I've always described havings to my friends is, if it's just you and I hanging out and I say I've got a pizza sitting in the living room, you'll go get it when you're hungry. But if we're in a concert full of 100,000 people and there's one pizza in the living room, whether you're hungry or not, you're going to get it because there's not going to be any left, whether you're hungry or not. And you may want to get some just in case. And that's how Satoshi even verbally put in the old forums. And so there's always been this very violent, blatant game theory type incentive to reward early participants, and that you might want to get a slice of pizza in the off chance that you're hungry, which sounds crazy. Of course I'm going to be hungry. So, but right. And I think in hindsight, it will sound just as crazy. Of course I want a little bit of the hardest asset that's ever been conceived in human history. Duh. But, for whatever reason, that's not as apparent. And those that do understand it before others are properly rewarded. I think that makes a ton of sense. Satoshi, him, her, them, whatever, infinite hats off.
I've seen and heard you talk enough to know that you're probably not going to answer this, but I'd be foolish to not ask while I have you on air. Do you mind giving us a price prediction for the end of 2022?
Yeah, I'll give it. I mean, I'm not gonna no answer you guys. I don't know how important it is. Here's the way I like to think about it. And I said this on the McCormick podcast. Bitcoin's just the harder money. And hard is in reference to how hard it is to create more of it. And so how hard is it to create more dollars? Seemingly not very difficult. How hard is it to create more penthouses in New York City? Harder than dollars, but not impossible. How hard is it to create more Bitcoin? The only asset that's ever existed where it is impossible. So in theory, it should appreciate against everything given time. Now the speculation is, in accordance to particular events like COVID or market perception and the Fed easing and tightening rates and so on and so forth. And I don't think speculating on that is very interesting. You're just timing the inevitable that this thing will appreciate given the monetary properties that it has. So 2022, I think we comfortably touch six figures. I think we exceed $100,000 this calendar year. Where we end it, which would mean on December 31st, I have no fucking idea. Say 100,000, I don't know. I just think my whole thing is money that you don't intend to spend and that you are going to save, just put it in Bitcoin. The way to think about it is if you hold it in dollars, your dream house right now that's $1 million, next year will be $5 million. Next year will be $10 million. And if you hold it in Bitcoin, it may be 200 Bitcoin. Next year, it's 150 Bitcoin. Next year, it's 100 Bitcoin. Next year, it's 50 Bitcoin. So life gets cheaper if you hold in the harder asset. Life gets more expensive if you hold in the weaker asset. And then of the money that you need to spend, I think it'll be increasingly achievable and attainable and a better experience when it's spent over Lightning. It's cheaper, it's faster, it's better, it's more global. And so that's the way I like to think about it. And, I don't know, price. It is what it is.
I look forward to the day where we're not worried about the price back in USD.
Yeah. I mean, I arguably am not worried about it right now. I mean, it is what it is. And unless like you're looking to buy a house next month, yeah, maybe you hope Bitcoin hits a little spike, but I don't know, 27, I'll want to buy a house at sometime in the future. So yeah, in order to support that desire, I stack sats. Fuck, like
Talk to us a little bit, because one thing that we touched on a little bit, the work Block is doing, and one thing that I'm really excited about, albeit it is still just in the white paper phase, is their decentralized exchange, that they say you're going to be able to buy anything from crypto to fiat and everything else in between, including real estate. How does something like real estate transactions look on a decentralized platform like Bitcoin? How do you envision that being built out without giving away the secrets that you're working on?
No. I mean, it's nothing to do with me. I admittedly, Jack Dorsey is just like a huge. I mean, I've looked up to him ever since I was a kid. He was like my Forbes like mentor, like my dream mentor or whatever. So anything that guy is working on, my net intuition is like he's figuring it out, and if I can't figure it out, he's probably got it figured out, and it'll take me time to catch up to his brain. But from my understanding, it's not decentralized in the way in which where it's backed by proof of work. It's more decentralized in like a torrent sense, where you can run a client that interfaces with this network of participants that is relaying data that is able to provide a payments experience or an onboarding experience to their users. And so I don't think it actually should be compared to like what people maybe now know as like a DEX or something like that. There is no mining, or I don't think you're fetching from a blockchain to remain in consensus and validate anything. I think it's more like a torrent, like in the same way that a lot of the early music networks that were decentralized, right? Like you're just passing music or data between each other. So that's to my knowledge. But I admittedly don't know enough about it to give a credible opinion. So you can really ignore whatever I'm saying. But that is my thoughts.
I appreciate the candid answer. I mean, it's interesting to watch this entire industry develop before our eyes. Bitcoin is still only a teenager, and it's not even old enough to drive a car. I'd love to give you the opportunity. I know we've been sort of stealing a lot of your time, and I don't want to take too much of it. Do you mind sharing maybe something that you're excited about that's coming up beyond the 60 Minutes interview and beyond just sort of what work you're doing at Strike? Is there anything else beyond that you're excited about?
I'm just excited for more people to come onto the Lightning Network. I really can feel a tipping point of sorts where I think it's going to be really, really, really interesting if someone on Shopify or if a store can accept any payment from any interoperable service and have instant dollars. And if they want some of those dollars to be Bitcoin or whatever source, but there's no fees to accept that. There's no regional restrictions, like it has to be within the United States. I think you're going to start to see a superior payments experience exist. Or if I walk into a Dunkin' Donuts and I can check out with Visa, or I could check out with this tap to pay Lightning or a QR code, and I get more rewards, I get half off, I get whatever. I think everyone gains from an open monetary network because there's more value capture for the participants that are actually delivering the value. Think about this. When I walk into a fucking Dunkin' Donuts, bro, I buy the coffee. I have the value to pay for it, and Dunkin' Donuts is the ones providing me the value. But close to 3% of that is given to like all these other people. For what the fuck? Like, they're not, what service are they providing? They're providing like finality of the transaction. But what I'm saying is Bitcoin and Lightning does all of that. Right. And so then the value, if you like close your eyes and try and visualize it, the value that exists in like all those institutions collecting the 3% for me to get a fucking coffee, where the true value exists between myself and Dunkin' Donuts, that 3% worth of value, which is Visa, issuing banks, acquiring banks, right, will go towards those that are actually delivering the true value, which are those making really dank coffee and those that have the money that want to buy it. And so I think that the Dunkin' Donuts of the world are really incentivized for people to use Lightning. You're going to start to see a flywheel like, hey, check out over Lightning. We'll give you half off. We'll give you more rewards. We'll give you more points, because the less intermediaries, the more value is up for grabs, the more value is going to leak into those that truly own it. It's better for Dunkin' Donuts. It's better for those that are building dope wallets. And the only people that are going to get pissed off by it are the Jamie Dimons, because now you have to compete for the value. You aren't just granted it because you have a banking license that you pay lobbyists to protect, you know? So I'm very keen this year. My mission is to be able to walk into a coffee shop and go on Shopify and, you know, shop my groceries and be able to use Lightning, whether I use dollars on it, Bitcoin on it, it's my choice. And that's what I'm most excited about.
I love that. I mean, to be honest, I need to go to my farmer's market next weekend and tell everyone to set this up. Someone tried to charge me 75 cents to buy a pupusa just to use a credit card, which was a 15% surcharge on the actual charge. Like it's crazy. And you're absolutely right.
What's insane though is like, let's say, so here's my thing too, is people are like, fuck you, man. Strike uses dollars, strikes regularly, whatever. My point is like, guys, listen, like Starbucks is not gonna like use like an unregulated, like violated, right? But my thing is like, I'm gonna go through the hoops and hurdles and the lobbying and the compliance and all that shit to get someone like Dunkin' Donuts interoperable. But then you can use whatever the fuck you want. And that's a hugely powerful day for humanity, is I can walk into Dunkin' Donuts and I can use a Lightning node that's in my basement running over Tor that I'm connected to via some like wallet UI interface and buy coffee privately on my own terms. I could use Bitcoin. I could use dollars over Lightning. I could use whatever I want. It's the consumer's choice. Right now, when I walk into Dunkin' Donuts, what consumer choice do I have? Visa, MasterCard. I have no consumer choice. So the whole point is getting people interoperable. Once we're all interoperable, then the choice lives with the consumer. And so I think, yeah, if your farmer's market, all these people, they just have to be interoperable. It's not like get them to like download Strike. No, download whatever. And like, but like, I think more like in the payment space, you call them acquirers, which are traditionally just merchants, but we need more acquirers interoperable to really like see this thing start to have a flywheel effect of value driven to the acquirer, then kicked back to the issuer, acquired. And then you start to, then I think the Jamie Dimons of the world would really start to panic. And who knows, like maybe Block turns it on in their point of sale and like we really go from there. We'll see.
Guys, you heard it here first. Jack Mallers is a Dunkin' guy, not a Starbucks guy. So let's make sure that Dunkin' goes ahead and starts accepting Lightning payments.
There you go. There you go. Neither.
Talk a little bit though about like I learned this literally while trying to set up the tips function today, that you're actually not sending sats, you're actually sending fiat over the Lightning network. And obviously this is due in part to taxes and whatnot. Talk a little bit about how that works and what the benefit of that is versus the benefit of sending Bitcoin via the Lightning network.
Yeah, well, the thinking is it's just a really awesome experience, is that like inevitably, like, listen, and my whole thing is if you are on the SAT standard, you don't own any fiat, great, that's great for you. Inevitably, there is like a chunk of the world where Bitcoin, if Bitcoin is going to become one of the more dominant assets, reserve assets in the world, it implies volatility on its journey there. And there are people that like taking half their paycheck, 25% of their paycheck, 75% of their paycheck in Bitcoin, but then the rest is in fiat. And what I'm saying is fiat interfaced over Lightning is a better experience than fiat interfaced over the Visa network. You know what I mean? And so the whole point is I can hold $100 and I can send those 100 US dollars anywhere in the world. I could send it to any merchant. I could send it to anyone else interoperable. And it's actually very complicated, engineering, compliance, legal, accounting to pull this off that we do at Strike. But the whole point is that right now, how many people hold a fiat balance that they look to spend? Everyone in the United States. And I'm saying if we make it interoperable over Lightning, then we crush the value that Visa and JP Morgan Chase and all these people hold, and we redistribute it to those that provide an experience on top of one network, which is Lightning. So it's effectively, I mean, my thing is you don't have to like you don't have to be on the Bitcoin standard and have to sell your Bitcoin and use sats to benefit from Lightning. I think Lightning is better than Visa, better than Western Union. And so I take the experience that people have today, which is just holding fiat dollars, and I just plug Lightning into it as opposed to like the Visa network. I don't know if that made sense, but that's, I mean, it's like part of this core thesis of, yeah, if life is about, or if the winners are going to be the best experience on top of Lightning, maybe one of those experiences that's interesting to a lot of people is taking US dollars and making them spendable over the Lightning Network. Maybe there's some like super cypherpunk wallet that people use as well. The way I like to talk about it is there's Chrome and there's Tor. Which browser is better? There's no better. Some people like Tor, some people like Chrome. Like, how do I check out over the Lightning Network at Dunkin' Donuts? Some people are going to like to spend their US dollars over the Lightning Network. Some people are going to like to use like the Tor non-custodial like wallet that's on your phone. Whatever, right? So it's just like one of those preferences, like it's just a particular experience that I think is going to be valuable to a lot of people.
Yeah,
That makes total sense.
I love the optionality and just giving, people the choice to choose. It's kind of, I feel like right now we might be at a point where there's kind of like an information overload about, especially like all these new retail investors coming into Bitcoin, like receiving Bitcoin, receiving Lightning, like what's the difference? Like I don't even understand, but I think as UX and like Strike has done a lot to like make this experience way better for users, I think that kind of optionality comes, after your initial hazing and after you spend some time
Yeah.
in Bitcoin. So
Think about
it's a
it this,
natural process.
yeah, I'll be like super practical about it. So I have an HOA on this place that I got to pay every month. I got to buy groceries. I don't have a car, so I'm an Uber guy. So I got to use Uber. Like I got a girlfriend that I love that I take on dates and shit. So there's like an entertainment value experience that I have, right? Like, so there I have these costs, and I don't here's my preferred personal. I get a large portion of my paycheck in Bitcoin because that money I don't intend to spend. And then when I think about the money that I have to spend that I get in dollars, this is paying the restaurants when I go on dates. This is paying Uber. This is paying my HOA. This is paying Whole Foods for the groceries. I'm saying Lightning is a better payment network than what I use today, which is the combination of Chase and Visa and the credit unions and shit. And so I'm saying, why can't I get Whole Foods, my building, all the restaurants in Chicago interoperable with Lightning, whether they use BTC Pay Server, Block, the Strike API, whatever, and then I can zip these dollars over the Lightning Network. Everyone wins. And then, right, like, or if I need to remit money to El Salvador, or if I, right, like it's just a superior payments network. And I can use some of the sats that I was planning to save if I really want to, but Bitcoin that I own, bro, doesn't ever like get spent. Like that's the way I live my life. And like, that's just my personal preference. Like I know how much I get paid every single month. And I know how much of that goes to living the lifestyle that I enjoy. And I know how much of that I want to save and persist over time. And so the saving and persisting over time, I get paid in Bitcoin, I withdraw it, goes to cold storage. And then for the money that I need to spend, I think it should be spendable over the Lightning Network. And there's no taxes involved in that. There's no capital gains. There's no volatility I deal with. I got, let's say, blanketed, I got $1,000 to spend this month. There's going to be a better payments experience if it's spendable over the Lightning Network. If the Dunkin' Donuts, so that I do go get a cold brew at, is Lightning with rewards and it's cheaper and they're capturing more value, and Visa doesn't exist in that user flow. So that's like very practical example of we can take the lifestyle I have today and we just use the Lightning Network to get rid of the fact that I could solely live on Strike and Lightning. No Visa, no Chase, no none of that shit. Remitting money, none of that shit. Buying coffee, none of that shit. Paying my friends, none of that shit. Maybe my friends are on Cash App, but because of Lightning, we can P2P each other between two independent services, So I'm just trying to like interoperability everywhere and replace Lightning should replace my relationship I have today with Visa. I have a relationship with Western Union. I have a relationship with Chase. I have a relationship with ACH. Lightning can replace all that shit. But it doesn't mean I need to like stop using dollars is my point. Like we can interface dollars on top of it.
For sure. I think, to wrap up here today, I want to remind everyone that Jack will be at the Bitcoin 2022 conference. and I'm sure you'll have some exciting announcements and exciting, talk to give. You can get 10% off your tickets with promo code YTMAG. And I guess the final question, Jack, what are you looking forward to about the Bitcoin 2022 conference?
Just being there, man. One of the things I appreciate most about Bitcoin, there wasn't an intent coming into it. I think everyone comes in whether they want to own an asset that's going to appreciate in its purchasing power or offer them superior payments or censorship resistance. All those qualities are really important. But I think what I underestimated and what I've grown to appreciate is just the people. I have this thesis about being a human, in that naturally, no matter who you are, just being alive, you inherently want two things. You want to be a part of something bigger than yourself. And that's just not living life alone. That's the creating a family, being part of an intramural team, joining a company, having friends, is that living life with human connection and building relationships. And then the other is working on something that will last longer than you will. And that's leaving a legacy. And that's understanding that the goal isn't to live forever. It's to hopefully build something that does and contributes to our species and to the longevity of the universe. And I think inherently everyone wants some form or facet of those two things. And Bitcoin perfectly encompasses that. And one of which is working on something that will last longer than I will. I think Bitcoin's going to last a lot longer than I will. And so that's great. But the other is not spending your life alone and finding like-minded people that are working on something as intimate and as ambitious and as personal and as valuable as Bitcoin is a really special thing. And you build a lot of awesome relationships. And so I'm just excited to give hugs and say hi and, share the vibrant energy that this conference always has with everybody. So just happy to be present.
Awesome, Jack. Thank you so much for your time, man. We're looking forward to seeing and hearing from you down there. We're all looking forward to this 60 minutes segment. That's not this week, it's the following week, right?
I don't know. My flight, look at my calendar. My flight's this afternoon. I don't know when it comes out, but yeah, I'm gonna chop it up, talk about El Salvador. So I'm excited. Be on the lookout for that. Shout out to Bitcoin Beach. I don't know when it comes out though.
We will make sure we broadcast that on all our channels here at Bitcoin Magazine. Don't you worry about that, Jack. In the meantime, though, everyone, if you don't already follow this man on Twitter, I don't know what you're doing with your life. Go make sure you follow him. The only 250,000 follower account that's not verified. Honestly, you should just keep that train going, baby.
Yeah. Once a pleb, always a pleb, man. Fuck that shit.
Love it, man. Jack, thank you so much for your time. Guys, we're going to take a quick commercial break and then we'll be back, just Alex and I. Thank you again. Stay tuned.
Peace out. Thank you guys. Much love.
Welcome back,
right.
everyone. Oh, sorry. I keep hijacking it from Alex because I've been getting way too comfortable with this mic. So I'm gonna give it back to Alex.
Oh no, you're good, man. You bring the energy to this. Wow, that was nice to sit down with Jack and pick his brain for an hour and a half there. I'm sorry we couldn't address everyone's questions. I'm sorry that Spaces crashed. I expected that. Did I not say it might happen? Like, we got too many
Yeah.
people in the Spaces room and it just falls apart. But still, what a great interview. What are your initial thoughts, reactions, Q?
I mean, I truly look up to him, and it's, for me, hearing someone that I just genuinely believe is smarter than me, sees the world in a different way than I do. I always love hearing his perspective on certain things. There was the little bit back and forth that him and I had regarding like the idea of having everyone on this Bitcoin standard, but then having their own sort of version of a currency built on top of that. I liked his explanation. I think what he brings up is valid about safety and protection and how difficult it is to transfer around gold versus the way Bitcoin. I can literally just send you a Bitcoin right now and no one's going to stop us, and it's fine. We're good there. I'm excited to see what he continues to build. I think the announcements that Strike will have between now and the end of this year will ramp it up. And as you've heard me complain in staff meetings and when we hang out, I hate the friction that I have to deposit money into Strike and then I have to go and buy. I would love to just be able to boom, just do it. Don't ask. There's money in the bank account. Trust me on that. So I'm excited. I was really pleased to get to ask the CEO of my favorite Bitcoin app, hey, are you guys fixing this one thing that I don't like? To hear a
Wait, I'm confused. When my Bitcoin hits Strike, it just hits.
No,
What do
because
you mean
that's because
exactly?
you take your paychecks in Strike. I don't. So that's the difference
Well,
there.
that's where you're fucking up, bro. You have the option. What are you doing?
We talked about this.
Q's
There,
taking his paychecks in Riot blockchain derivatives and Facebook stock.
I actually get it in the Subway footlong token, and then I transfer that out to whatever else I need to spend it on. But my biggest
Yeah,
bag is the Subway footlong token.
yeah. If you guys get this video over 200 likes, we'll start paying Q and Doge,
Dude,
and
it
we'll work
has
our
over
way towards
300 likes
Bitcoin.
already. So start paying me a Doge. Joke's on you.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, look, I was actually surprised that he actually gave, wait, what did Chris just say? Oh my God. Honestly, if someone starts a Subway footlong coin, we have to take credit for the inception. Like it stemmed from this conversation. Someone's going to do it. Please don't do it. If you're watching this and hearing this, do not go and make another shitty token. Go and just stack sats. I do not take credit for this. But like him giving a price prediction, I know how hesitant he always is at stuff like that. Um, him sort of diving a little bit into Canada without getting hyper political again, something I kind of expected given his background. But I was really grateful that he still shared his perspective and brought it back to Bitcoin. I think you were salivating at the fact that regardless of what I asked him, it always tied back into Bitcoin. He thinks differently than most people, but I think people who operate at a level like Jack Dorsey, Jack Mahler's, guys like that think differently than you and I do. They just do. And hearing them think, hearing the way they process information, that is what was so valuable about this conversation, in my opinion.
Yeah, the fact that he thinks at all, you might say, distinguishes him from a lot of people, especially today. No, I really appreciate that. I appreciate, a guy who takes a few seconds to collect his thoughts before answering a question. Like, these were not neat packaged answers. Certainly some of these things he's thought about time and again and spent probably countless hours interviewing and talking to people about, but he always finds a way to like freshen it up, make it interesting. I'm a big metaphor analogy guy, and I think yeah, like what he brings to the table is some good variation that you never know. It might hit someone on one day and have no effect. They listen to this interview and he used the right metaphor and they're like, fuck it, I'm gonna try a Strike. Which, by the way, I gotta say, I was probably like one of like the first couple thousand people to like use Strike. Like I was on that shit early and it was bad. Like when it started, like it was a bad experience. Like I did not like it at all. And I stuck with it, and now it's like one of my favorite apps. It's like they have like the best widget for viewing the price from your iPhone screen. You can get paid in Bitcoin. You can buy Bitcoin seamlessly. So I'm really that's a great perspective that he brought, that Strike will like catch up to the world. Like you're gonna look back a few years from now and be like, okay, it didn't really matter that all the 48, the lower 48 minus New York got Strike early. Like we'll get there. Like I think the world will be on like some kind of Strike standard, because I don't really see how the other exchanges can compete outside of Coinbase, which big casino.
Yeah, I mean, he pushed everyone's hands. Like he started introducing such low fees that everyone now has to be buying on Lightning. Like Cash App rolling it out on Lightning is in no small feat because they're losing their customer base. If you actually looked at Block's recent earning reports, they in the last quarter, number of Bitcoin buys went down, and that's the first decline since they really started seeing that hyperbolic growth during the COVID crisis, if you will. So whether that's Strike taking market share, whether that's other companies taking market share, they they being Block is the only publicly traded company that is Lightning that is using Lightning that is going to be sharing this information publicly for now. I do think that at some point Strike will be a public company. It's just inevitable. There's too much money on the table, and as much as uh, Jack may be resistant, I do think that some of the investors that have money in it may be looking at things in a different lens. I don't know if that takes away from their overall mission or goal. I just think that it will be interesting to see what, like, I tried to ask him a little bit about growth and he didn't necessarily actually answer the question, but for good reason. They're keeping that information close to the vest. And those signs point to me as you're going to go public in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, you would know better than I do. I'm not really sure what their long-term plans are in terms of that. I just know that got a lot of Europeans and Brazilians looking to and Canadians looking for an app like Strike, because there's no alternative, man. I mean, like, I always keep a couple exchanges on hand because, you know, they go down or you run into like limits, withdrawal, deposit limits, shit like that. But it's the one I choose for convenience every time, and it's not even a shill. Like, I don't make a dime from Strike. It's just a really great app that's focused on doing one thing correctly, and that's just that kind of monomaniacal quest that Jack is on. I mean, that's the kind of developers like that we need in Bitcoin. That's the kind of people. That's why Jack Dorsey left Twitter, just to, you know, just to concentrate your energies, take stock of like what you can contribute, and then just go for it. Just fully pure play focused on the Bitcoin. I love to see it.
But also, even Jack, as humble as he is, like, made a point to say the app has gotten better once I started coding in it. And as someone who myself went through like being a self-taught coder and then going down the line of being in a coding boot camp, like Jack is literally, in my opinion, the most successful person to ever take that route, because like that is not
Wait, wait,
available.
wait. He said it's gotten better since he stopped coding it.
Yes. He called himself
Okay,
a
okay,
sleazy,
yeah,
sleazy salesman. And his whole thing
yeah,
right now, I think, is focused on growing the user base and
yeah.
letting tried and true. I hate saying it like this, but like, I think,
Just more seasoned developers work
yeah,
on it. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
they are focused
He's
now on building the app and the UX of it up. And I think as a result, like you even heard him talk about, like, my issue with the app is this whole friction of deposit fiat and then go and get Bitcoin. And he even brought up like, well, when I was starting this, it seemed like too much of a hassle. So I was like, forget it, move on. And now it's something that they are going back to change. So you see even some of the first iterations of it, he sees the mistakes he made. And he just wants to get better at what you do and then grow from there.
Yeah, like if I could, I mean, if I was going to invest like in their company or something, in any company, it's just based on kind of like the charisma and the pitch of the leader, you know. Um, Jack's way up there, both Jacks actually, because they do have like boots on the ground experience. They have a little bit, they know what's going on, like developer side a little bit. You know, they're not really making products themselves, but they tried. You know what I mean? They have an eye on these things, but also they take the signals that the market gives them that, hey, this isn't working. You need to cut X, Y, Z, and they do it, and that's all you need. And you grow, and your production cycle increases, and you reinvest that capital, and you grow, and you bring in more users, and you take over the next country and the next country. And I mean, they've already beaten all these other exchanges in the race to make Bitcoin, you know, no added fees, no third party taking their cut. It's free. It's great.
No, I mean, look, I'm grateful that I got sent over to. I mean, we could go down this Quibi rabbit hole if we really want. I have my own rationales and some insider information that I can gladly share as to some other reasons why they just fucking sucked. Um, but I think to talk a little bit more about Jack, like I have to admit, like even right now, while we're like talking about it and rehashing it, I'm spacing on the fact that we are literally live on YouTube because it felt like a conversation with just like a friend, not someone who like is up in their head about the fact that they're literally meeting with global financial leaders, pushing forward change in a system that we all believe in and support. He, whether or not he wants to take credit for it, El Salvador and Bukele give him a lot of credit for helping push forward the legislation, helping them craft it, making sure it's done in the right way. That that may only be the only country that may be the only country he really works hand in hand with, but for every country that Bukele goes and orange pills after that, that is essentially Jack having done it as well. So whether or not he wants to take credit for that, I think it's so important. I mean, I will always say, I will tell him thank you until the day I die, plain and simple.
Yeah, sorry, I got distracted. I just got a DM from Robert Breedlove, but the DM just says I don't. And there's no context. There's no prior message history, so I don't know what he's talking about.
Wait, but is it
That's
the
quite
real?
distracting.
Is it? Because I started getting a lot of.
No, it's definitely Robert Breedlove.
Let me tell you, after we had Breedlove, I had like 8 Breedlove accounts start following me on Twitter. So that was that was really fun. My Quibi.
Sorry to derail the conversation. I don't know
No.
anything about Quibi. What's Quibi's deal?
So Quibi was a streaming app only, no website that was essentially created by Jeffrey Katzenberg, who I believe he created DreamWorks. I want to make sure I give him the appropriate credit. Like truly one of the, okay. He was chairman of Walt Disney from 84 to 94. And then he also founded DreamWorks and DreamWorks Animations and all of that stuff. Dude was like a legend in Hollywood. Essentially had this idea that instead of Netflix, instead of Hulu and whatnot, people are watching so much content on their cell phones that he wanted to make a streaming service strictly for your phone. The issue is like watching an hour and a half long movie on your phone is kind of a tough ask. But what if you take an hour and a half movie and made it 9 episodes, 10 minutes long each episode, and broke it up like that? The argument was that because our generation and younger is so much more focused on viewership on their phones versus laptops or TVs, that he was really going to hone in on that market demographic. Theoretically, you're absolutely right. Now, when I was working with Quibi, I had a client who was actually writing a project for them. He was actually rewriting the Evan Spiegel Snapchat biopic. They were essentially trying to make there's a script written about Snapchat in the same way that there was for Zuckerberg and Facebook. I'm spacing on the movie that Jesse Eisenberg starred in. They essentially wanted to, and I kid you not, this was the exact word I had to say to a client. They want to quibify this script. Social Network. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Essentially break it up into these 10-minute episodes. My client does it, hits it out of the park. I am cackling hysterically reading this script. I'm like, oh, dude, you're about to get a deal with Quibi. Let's go. They turn around. They're like, well, actually, this isn't what we're looking for. This is the demographic that this is going to go after is between 12 and 25 years old. And we looked at each other like, that's your demographic. You said that is the demographic you want. He's like, no. We changed our stance. We're going for 35 and older. And they literally flipped the script and they started producing content catered to and targeted towards people who don't watch content on their phone. Say what you want about the fact that, oh, the COVID pandemic stopped people from commuting. The whole idea was, oh, if you sit on the metro, you can watch a quick 10-minute clip of the movie you're watching or news updates or whatever. That idea and concept works on Snapchat very well. And it was going to work on Quibi until they changed their target demographic for content.
Yeah, I'm pretty short on that idea. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, thanks for your pitch. I'm gonna pass on Quibi. It sounds like shit. But I'm still in the market for like a good decentralized alternative video platform. I mean, that's something we gotta figure out too. But Anyway, bringing it back to Jack. Second thoughts. We've had some time to digest. What are you thinking?
I mean, I love the way that like Jamie Dimon is after this kid. Jamie Dimon is hunting him and he knows it. And he point blank just calls him out and says, come play on our court. Fuck you, man. Like, if you don't really care about what you're trying to do and hold on to sort of this last semblance of the system that you have benefited from, that's fine. But we're just going to break it down in the meantime. He's fully aware of the efforts that Jamie is putting on against him in DC. He's fully aware of the efforts that are going on against him in other countries as well. But I think he is singly focused on increasing Bitcoin's exposure, giving access to Bitcoin to as many people as possible. And if anyone wants to stop him, he welcomes it. And I think it goes back to the idea of all press is good press. If Jamie Dimon wants to get up in DC and in a public forum and specifically say Jack Mallard or Strike or Bitcoin, that is a net positive for Bitcoin. Even if he says JP Morgan will never do this, will never accept Bitcoin, which they do for their super rich clients, they do. You can't stand to reason. It stands to reason that once that is said by Jamie Dimon in DC on a recorded platform, it's over. Bitcoin will have reached so many people at that point that honestly, Jamie Dimon is going to be one of the poors. And I look forward to that.
One of the poors. Oh, there's a metaphor that comes to mind. I don't know if this is interesting to a broader audience, but fuck it. So in jiu-jitsu, there is a strategy, and in chess too, where really you know that you're one move ahead of your opponent. I love to play this strategy, and so you simply wait to capitalize on a mistake. You know, they put their hand in the wrong place. Okay, well, I collect that hand. That's my hand, and now they put their arm until you get the throat, and that is essentially what Bitcoin is doing. It's like an anaconda around these like legacy institutions, and it's circumventing them and their stupid emergency orders, you know, every time. There's nothing they can do. This is what a decentralized network is. You cannot fight a decentralized network with a centralized kind of like authoritarian regime and win. Like, we'll subsume them every time. The best thing that they can do to stave off people adopting Bitcoin is spread misinformation about it, make the on-ramps and off-ramps difficult. Like, they could do away with Strike, but that doesn't have anything to do with the Bitcoin network at large. You know what I mean? They could just kind of like ruin the experience of using Strike and make the experience of using Bitcoin back to, you know, make it regress a couple years. But no big deal, man. We already know that we're in it for the long haul. I'm not worried about that at all.
Yeah. And, you know, while we are on this topic, I mean, the man is a two-time chess champion. I loved that sort of background on him where, like, to your point too, it is, I think that history for him and that experience has allowed him to see the Bitcoin network in that way you describe, where he is literally playing 3D chess with the entire global financial market. And this is a chess champion. So my money's on him, but that's just my 2 cents there.
Yeah, that's why I so want to get Maulers into. I want to orange pill Maulers into jiu-jitsu. Everyone that's good at chess is good at jiu-jitsu, but that's a different conversation.
Don't hurt him.
What do you mean? No, he would love it. Meditation, chess, like that's all. That's what jiu-jitsu is. It's great.
Also, shout out to the commenter who brought up Eckhart Tolle. That is sort of the last. Yes.
All right, CK coming in hot with the Perth Heat jersey. Let's go. Is it Perth or Pert?
Perth.
How do you pronounce it? Okay,
Perth.
Cool. Love it.
Yo, just gotta flex.
Yeah.
Love the swag, man. That's crazy. I love it. How many Bitcoin jerseys are there? Bedford, Perth. There was that soccer team that got Watford, yeah. There it is. I have that one.
I mean, we're only focused on the Bitcoin ones, right? Because there are like a bunch of random exchanges on different NBA jerseys right now as well, which I I know that we are Bitcoin focused. It is important though, because the exposure of it,
Southampton.
send them down the rabbit hole, man. Send everyone down these rabbit holes, and eventually they will find Bitcoin, even if they get lost along the way.
Yeah, or in Coinbase's case, send them to a 404 error.
Hey, you know what? They are getting orange pilled onto how crappy Coinbase is right from the get-go.
Dude, did you
That's
guys see
right.
Brian Armstrong get called out for lying about the ad, the Super Bowl
No,
ad?
that.
No,
Oh,
what
dude,
did he
it's
do?
so
Tell the
funny.
story.
Essentially, like, he posted this thread of like, how did we come up with such a cool app? La la la. I'm a genius. And he like talked about how all these ad agencies pitched him on this, pitched him on that. He's like, no, that's not authentic to our brand. So I came up with the idea for a QR code. And then this girl who runs an ad agency literally comments, we pitched you on the QR code, you liar.
Ooh. Well, yeah.
How do you not think that they're not gonna like call you out on that?
I don't know. Yeah. We got Dylan.
Still gets
chiming
away
in
with it.
here.
He
The
does.
thing is, in terms of the people, most of the people don't see that comment.
Yep.
That's true. That is true. Also, before we take a break and then have our deep dive segment, I think one of the stories that I did want to kind of touch on and share, another one from iHeartRadio and then circulating on Twitter. Be sure to check out. We posted the thread about this, I think, about how Drake, yes, lover boy Drake, sent 6.6 Bitcoin over to Kodak Black just out of the blue. From what I've gathered, it wasn't even like he owed him 250K or 300K. He was just like sent Kodak, Drake sent Kodak a message being like, yo, do you have any Bitcoin? No. All right, well, go set it up. I'm going to send you some. Like, oh,
Yeah, he said, go set up Bitcoin. So Kodak, thanks to Kodak, we all have Bitcoin. He set up Bitcoin for us.
Kodak Black, who by the way looks like the best friend in Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide, who I just think legitimately that actor just went down like a dark path and became Kodak Black. But yeah, I mean that is hilarious to me. I shout out to Bitcoin for the Hood, who I know you watch from time to time and are a follower. I see the work that you do, orange pilling your community. And I think it's really important for figures from that community who are talking about Bitcoin. Again, it brings it into the conversation more and more. And it's helpful for everyone to see, hey, Drake is using Kodak Black. Well, shit, if these guys do it and I buy their fucking clothes, why wouldn't I also invest in the same things that they're invested in too? It's a little step in the right direction.
What's the over under on that Bitcoin getting lost? Because I want to know what
you still hold it right now.
I think Kodak either is gonna liquidate it or lose it for sure. Like, we need to get him a good wallet solution.
Kodak, if you're watching, why don't you come on and Alex is gonna walk you through proper self-custody steps. But we're going to take a quick commercial break, and then we're joined by the legend himself, Dylan LeClaire. Today's just an episode full of legends, man. And we're going to do a deep dive segment. So stay tuned and stick around.
Bitcoiners, welcome back to another Bitcoin Magazine Spaces. This one is being simul streamed both on Twitter Spaces as well as on Bitcoin Magazine YouTube. Over on the top of the space, you can access the YouTube page. The link is right there. You can see a beautiful picture of Jack Mallers, who was on just before this. Jack is such a young mover and shaker in the space. It's really incredible. We have another one on stage now, the man, the myth, the legend, Dylan LeClaire, who is the lead of the Bitcoin Magazine Deep Dive, which is a no BS, all signal, full cycle, full circle, 100%, just complete market newsletter looking at what is happening in Bitcoin, what is happening in the world, and how this all fits together. Really excited to do this weekly space and YouTube stream, give updates along everything that's happening in the market. Want to give the mic over to Dylan. Dylan, how you doing, my man? How you feeling with Bitcoin over here at 37K?
What's up, guys? Happy to be here. I don't really like when I get put in the same sentence as Jack Mallers. It feels like a disservice to Jack and all the cool things he's doing. But yeah, I mean, happy to join today and talk some things in the market. In terms of how I'm feeling, Bitcoin at 37K, I've been kind of expecting for the last couple months here, just more consolidation and kind of choppiness, really not trying to do any sort of trading. And honestly, with the deep dive stuff, I really try to, Sam Rule and I really try to blend like our long-term Bitcoin thesis of it's the best money the world's ever seen with its, kind of shorter term trading ranges, what's happening in the market, that, the kind of cycle dynamics. And so, I mean, this is nothing but a thing. A lot of class of 2021 investors are underwater, but most anybody that's has significant sums of wealth or Bitcoin has gone through a ton of volatility on the way, and oftentimes the worst thing to do is to become a forced seller or really to sell at all. And I think for anyone worried about the volatility, manage your position size accordingly. But we're kind of in, I believe, the start of somewhat of a credit unwind here. And we'll see if the Fed walks back any of their supposed tightening into 2022, but we can kind of dig into that as we go.
Awesome. So, I mean, I know we should pin this up to the top as well, but you dropped a mega thread earlier this week, yesterday, I believe, really kind of diving into a lot of what's happening around Bitcoin price and in the Bitcoin market. Do we want to just jump right into that?
Yeah, let's do it. Happy to. I'm gonna pin it to the top right now. Got to figure out how to do that.
Let me take care of that, and maybe you can just jump right into the content.
Cool. So I can share my screen here for the viewers on YouTube. Share the screen. So everybody is wondering what's going to happen with Bitcoin. When are we going to new all-time highs? When is the the quote unquote decoupling going to occur? And they're all super valid questions. I think we like to look at, for the deep dive, we like to really dig deep into on-chain stuff, derivative market stuff. But right now, that's on the back burner for sure. As it looks, really what's driving everything right now is credit markets. And bond markets, yields, all of that stuff is not the sexiest thing in the world. And actually most people in Bitcoin that are convicted believe that we're building a replacement altogether for that incumbent credit system. But the reality is that still runs the show. And what we're seeing here with inflation at 40-year highs, if you're using the CPI index, and I know a lot of people, including myself, believe that's actually understated. We're seeing inflation at 40-year highs with the Fed funds still at zero. So the Fed hasn't even raised rates yet, but the bond market's doing their work for them. So if you're looking at any maturity across the Treasury curve, whether it's 6-month notes or 30-year bonds, they're selling off in actually quite aggressively. And so if you have to think about that from not so much as like an investor, but think about that as someone that needs financing. Think of that from the other side, someone that needs credit in their life. What happens if your mortgage payment rises by 20 or 30%? And so if you're thinking about that from a corporate standpoint, in terms of corporate financing, and kind of really the last 10 years, or the story of the last really 20 years, but the last 10 years specifically after the great financial crisis with quantitative easing and zero interest rate policy, it's what's fueled everything has just been a huge debt binge with real rates deeply negative, or negative for a long time, and then after 2020 and COVID, deeply negative, right? Negative 6.5% real yield. So the incentive for everyone, every rational economic actor in a world where cash is a liability and debt is an asset, right? It seems like it's like kind of an upside down, bizarre world. The incentive is to lever up, right? And that's what everybody did. All the corporates, you saw like real estate boom, but really everything is a function of this kind of easy money credit binge. And so now with inflation at 40-year highs, we're seeing this huge kind of demand shock post-COVID where governments threw money at people. The Fed has a dual mandate, and regardless of what they want to do, their policy, or rather their lack of policy action, has become somewhat of a political liability, and they're feeling pressure from the establishment. So Powell's putting on a brave face and saying we're going to go tighten, and the market is honestly doing most of the work for him when you're looking at yields. So what does that mean? I mean, really, there's two main things if you're thinking about equities, and subsequently, when you're thinking about equities, debt, all of this stuff, Bitcoin is affected. Why? Because everything's a function of this liquidity tide, right? And the end game, the reason we're bullish on Bitcoin is because we think this liquidity tide has to continue forever. That's the game. But over the short to medium term, the tide can pull out, and a lot of people will be swimming left, completely naked. And so I think that's what we're beginning to see. You're seeing corporate credit spread. So basically when you're looking at the treasury yield, that's like, you can think of that as your risk-free rate. And whether it's risk-free or not is another story, but the financing costs for corporates you can look at corporate credit spreads, basically the added premium on top of these treasury yields. So not only are treasury yields bending up, but corporate credit spreads are also aggressively bending upwards. So really? You're seeing that. I'm sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you. I want to quickly ask you on that last image you shared, because Lynn Alden has talked a little bit about the idea that what we're seeing right now is more synonymous with the 1940s versus the 1970s. And we saw in that last image a little bit of that like green and red shading that kind of showcased that. I think it was number 3 on your thread, that one. Yeah. And we kind of see it right here where it's like in the 70s, yes, there's a little bit of this red, but it's not real. It's just a straight decline during most of it. And you see a majority green. Whereas pretty much since the 2008 financial crisis, we've seen inflation well above the actual Fed funding rate. Sorry, Jesus. And the only other time you kind of see that is right before the 54. Can you touch on a little bit of if you see it similarly or if you see that differently?
Yeah, I mean, Lynn's analysis is top notch. I think there's a couple things. Everyone, we're comparing this to the 70s because it's, the highest we've seen consumer price inflation, but the 40s is definitely more of an apt comparison when you're looking at just kind of historical precedent. So what happened in the 40s, World War II, it was, in the 30s or following the Great Depression, huge private debt bubble. How does that get resolved? It gets resolved by confiscating everyone's gold and then immediately revaluing it higher. What does that effectively do? It effectively lowers the real debt burden. Okay, so that was kind of a way they inflated the debt, but it was more in the private sector. Fast forward about a decade, World War II comes around, and we basically see a huge increase in government debt as percent of GDP. It reached huge levels. I don't have the chart in front of me, but government debt as a percent of GDP just absolutely skyrocketed. And so that's a problem. It got to unsustainable levels. Well, how was that solved? It was solved with yield curve control by the Federal Reserve. It was literally a stated policy to cap yields and basically let inflation run higher than those yields. It erodes the real debt burden. So anybody that was holding these bonds over really any duration was essentially, they were guaranteed to lose purchasing power. It was almost like a lost decade for investors as governments were doing all sorts of things like financing wars. So, fast forward 30 years and when you're thinking about what Paul Volcker did with the Fed in the 70s, it was really chasing inflation that was for, a lot of reasons, including a demographic boom, kind of oil embargo stuff that happened with OPEC, but there was a huge inflationary impulse because of many different things. Really, like the boomer or the demographics played a big role, and Volcker was chasing. So he raised rates to extreme amounts to try to really clamp down on this inflation, and it worked. But now we're in a different environment where that inflation is absolutely ripping, but the debt burdens are way higher than they were in the 70s. So they're if Powell even wanted to be Volcker, he couldn't go out and raise rates to 7% tomorrow, because everything, the entire financial system globally, would collapse on itself. And so, in the thread, I also included basically this IMF paper that came out that detailed all of this and said, basically, we're in a huge government debt bubble. They didn't say it like that, but they said it in an academic way. And they said, what can we do? And basically what they said was, all right, we're going to let inflation rip. We're going to artificially hold yields on government securities low. So central banks are going to be a buyer and step in and artificially suppress the cost of capital. And we're going to basically hold pensions, government pensions and other capital allocators captive. They literally use that word, domestic capital, to hold captive to buy these securities and hold them and lose their real purchasing power. So when real yields are deeply negative, it's essentially a wealth transfer from creditors to debtors. And so that's what we've seen over the last decade. And so now what we're seeing is credit start to really sell off, and that liquidity tide's pulling out. And essentially in a fiat currency, what happens during these events, if they actually are allowed to unfold, and we'll see if the Fed, doesn't reverse course on their supposed taper attempt. But really a deflationary or a credit collapse, a credit unwind, what's really happening is essentially a short squeeze on the fiat currency itself, right? So fiat units are destroyed when there's a default. Money is created through lending, but it's also destroyed through repayment or default. And so when these kind of risk-off events occur, these credit illiquidity events that quickly turn into solvency events, what occurs is that money is destroyed. And so almost in a deflationary type way, fiat currency units are decreasing, and there's a short squeeze. Everybody's short dollars. Everybody is implicitly short fiat or short US dollars, right? As with the dollar as the world reserve currency. And so every asset, or really, anything that has a USD denomination, whether that's Bitcoin, equities, bonds, when there's a short squeeze on the fiat currency, well, those things are going to sell off. And so I think that's what we're beginning to see here. Obviously, Bitcoin has its own kind of adoption phase and monetization process alongside that. But it's definitely not, kind of insulated from these sorts of credit events, similar to kind of March 12th. And so am I calling for March 12th to happen? No, but just looking at some of these things that are happening under the surface that don't get a lot of attention, like corporate credit spreads and volatility index and some of the stuff that I included, it has an effect on the Bitcoin market. And that's why, as bullish as I am long-term, I have more Bitcoin than I ever have. I also have a good stack of cash that I'm not too worried about sitting onto for the time being.
Thank you for letting me interrupt your flow.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely rambling. So,
I want to jump in. Yeah, I want to jump in real quick, and not to ask an intelligent question, but to tell everyone who is on the Twitter Spaces to go check out the second pinned tweet, which is or third pinned tweet, which is taking you to YouTube. Dylan is sharing a screen and walking through the thread, kind of tweet by tweet. That's the best way to view this. But you can also view the thread by seeing the article that I pinned to the top. So check that out. And yeah, I mean, Dylan, if you want to just jump back to your tweets, I think you're painting a really clear picture here.
Yeah, cool. So I can just continue on here. I'm at 8 right now, but we're talking about the sell-off in credit markets. Obviously, the financing role for corporate credit has a big factor, but recently what we're seeing is that part hasn't even started to play out yet. What's been happening is essentially with the sell-off in the NASDAQ, with the sell-off in a lot of these, like what you want to think of, if you want to call them growth stocks, really just overvalued software companies that have a perceived network effect that were bid up like crazy in 2020 and 2021. You're seeing those names collapse, right? All the FANG stocks, just really growth in general, the NASDAQ. Look at ARK, which is its own kind of crazy liquidity profile / bubble. But the sell-off is actually because of a collapse kind of the start of a collapse in multiples or earnings multiples. So when you're thinking about a higher treasury yield, that discount rate is increasing. So that, you're valuing your 10-year treasury, and a lot of people say that's return-free risk. I agree most of the time, except when these unwinds occur. And so, when everybody is caught kind of swimming naked when the tide goes out. And so as everybody has been, or every corporate really, well, every economic actor that was rational over the last decade has levered up because real yields are negative. When these kind of liquidity events start to unfold, the reason why when I'm showing something like that, corporate option adjusted spread, those credit spreads, why do they seemingly, why is that kind of trade reflexively? Well, it's because credit illiquidity leads to volatility, which leads to increasing illiquidity, which eventually turns into solvency risk, right? So we have the most over indebted corporate environment we've seen. Really, I don't know if it's ever, but historic for sure. Someone maybe fact check me on that, but what that leads to is during liquidity events, if you can't refinance, if you can't get that credit when you're very over indebted, that leads to credit risk, and that kind of is a reflexive cycle all the way down. The dollar is getting bid in that environment. So I think that's what comes next, unless the Fed reverses course, right? All we've seen now is essentially the PE ratio. And if you want to think of the inverse of the PE ratio, that's you can think of that as the S&P 500 earnings yield. It's not a bond, but it's a company that's spitting off cash flow. Your earnings multiple, your price to earnings ratio, if you flip that upside down, that's your earnings yield. So right now that's with PE ratios at 20, that's 5%. But so the sell-off we've seen really hasn't been due to a collapse in earnings. It's just that earnings multiples falling because yields are rising. And so we'll see, what that threshold is for credit markets. But until then, it looks like we're at the start of some sort of unwind. And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself in terms of, calling for some sort of crash. I'm not, but I would just say, we're not in the upswing like we were in 2020 and much of 2021. We're actually kind of over the hump and into the downswing of what happens after a credit boom. And it leads to, in a free market, it leads to, creative destruction, bankruptcies. And we haven't seen that, right? We didn't even really get a business cycle in 2020 following COVID because of that huge liquidity tide. And so there's a lot of debt out there, and there's a lot of misallocation of capital. And so that's just why I would say, to remain somewhat, have your expectations somewhat, what's the word? I guess just tapered, if you want to use that word, for the time being, in terms of just the liquidity profile of global markets. Anything in particular I went over too fast there?
I do want to confirm that, yes, in fact, we do have the highest level of corporate debt ever historically. But I kind of want to ask you a little bit. So we see Bitcoin in the past having had these 4-year sort of cycles rooted around the halvenings, or whatever other thing you want to say it's rooted around. Based on what you're saying, so you view things as we are sort of in this basing period, if you will. Are your expectations that regardless of price action, we really won't see a new all-time high in the immediate future until the next halvening? Or where is it that you're really looking for that catalyst to push to new highs?
Yeah, so I believe that the 4-year cycle is no longer. It could just coincidentally trade it up in the halving, right? Or maybe just on narrative alone, Bitcoin pumps because it's this big global event and fiat currency and trust in governments is waning around the world, and so Bitcoin is this flight to safety, increasingly so. But I think for the time being, the liquidity profile of global markets is on the downswing. Central banks, at least the Fed, is saying they're going to taper. And so in terms of when an all-time high comes, you have this kind of natural monetization process or adoption cycle of Bitcoin, right? Where people in Canada are being essentially deplatformed for supporting the wrong political party. You have El Salvador that's sticking a middle finger to the IMF, and they're saying, we're going to finance our government projects on a crypto exchange through Bitfinex, on the Liquid protocol, on the Liquid network, and we're gonna raise this kind of new Bitcoin backed bond, and that when we set up these mining facilities, we're going to do that. So I think from a narrative perspective, if that's successful, right, you can expect countries to follow. And so like that's super powerful. And I know for a fact that there's people that are sidelined or have been sidelined for Bitcoin's entire history that are now securing an allocation. So there is somewhat like the decoupling happens for a couple of reasons, but really it's because that adoption of Bitcoin is up and to the right in terms of the people that understand it and the capital. But Bitcoin itself being absolutely scarce, the reason it kind of trades reflexively so is because you have these HODL waves that happen. You have this like club of demand that strikes when no one's selling, and the inelasticity of that market means that Bitcoin goes parabolic. You have derivatives that overlay on top of it where people can speculate with their Bitcoin holdings to leverage long Bitcoin. All of these things, which also affect the market besides the kind of liquidity tide that we're talking about, are important. But I think for the time being, they're less important. On-chain analysis has gotten quite like not a bad rap, but people have been saying that it's no longer valid or that it's hopium or anything else. And the reality is like the demand, the supply side of on-chain analytics, the things that we can see with transparency looks very, very strong. The reason that things are selling off is because of what we're covering with credit markets, because the demand isn't there and actually it's net sellers, right? So when Bitcoin makes all-time highs, I mean, it could make it, in the next couple of months, depending. I mean, I don't know, any catalyst could come up tomorrow, but I think really remaining cautious until the macro sellers on the margin, the liquidity tide pulling out flips. And I think that's when Bitcoin actually blows people out of the water in terms of its performance. And because, you're going to have trillions of dollars following this unwind and subsequent attempt at reinflation. That's going to try to have to buy, a few 100,000, couple million Bitcoin, and the rest of it are people that know the end game already. And so, the stackers of last resort are eating the free float every single day, but you're not always going to see that reflected in the market price, and that's fine.
I'm curious your thoughts, and this is purely speculative at this point, but as more people begin to adopt Bitcoin, like a natural human inclination is greed. And these later adopters are looking at some of us who have whole coins or multiple coins, and they're like, I need to catch up. Are you seeing derivatives markets increase leverage longs as more adoption increases? Like, are the leverage longs in 2022, are there more of them, or over a basket of from 2020 to 2022, are there more leveraged longs in that time period versus in time periods of the past, like say 2013 to 2017 or 2017 to 2020?
Yeah, so 1 second, I'm muted. In terms of derivative markets on top of Bitcoin, it's really somewhat of a recent thing. We didn't have them in the early cycles. I think the first one was Arthur Hayes and BitMEX in 2015, 2016. I think there was other kind of bucket chops before that, but really until 2017, even 2018 was when things started to ramp up in a big way. And so in terms of positioning right now, there's really not, in terms of like debt in the market, it's mostly risked off. Like that's from 69,000 to, below 40,000. Essentially it was speculative positions in the crypto markets and Bitcoin just kind of unwinding. So for every short, there's a long. So there can never be more longs than shorts per se, but the positioning of those derivatives relative to the spot market is what matters. So right now we're actually seeing like derivative products like the perpetual swap, which is just a futures contract that never expires. You're seeing that's trading below the price of spot Bitcoin on a lot of exchanges. And so like, what can you tell from that? It means that like derivative traders, instead of being speculative to the upside, are actually like being really cautious. And you're actually getting paid to enter long positions oftentimes on these positions, right? So you're entering a margin contract, but you're getting paid to sit on the long side. So in terms of like kind of debt in that market, really that's entirely risked off. It was the complete opposite in April of 2021, and in November, you saw people were paying 50% annualized rates, 20% annualized rates in April and November to be long Bitcoin on margin. And so in terms of speculative activity, that's completely gone. And so like, what's the kind of true organic price there? No one can really know. But oftentimes like the bottom of bear markets look like everybody being completely bearish and offsides on the kind of to the short side or to the underside in derivatives. And the top of bull markets is when everybody believes this time is different and they're longing their longs and pushing the price of Bitcoin up kind of synthetically using leverage, using debt. And what we see with those is there's naturally cascades that's expressed through market volatility. When everyone says, Bitcoin's too volatile because it's down 17% today after being up 500% over the last year. Well, the reality was, like, without that kind of debt, there wouldn't have been, without that leverage and that speculative activity, Bitcoin wouldn't have made it that high. So it is kind of the wild, wild west, and you're going to see the volatility stay in the Bitcoin market, in my opinion. But increasingly, I think over the next year, that volatility will be expressed because of craziness in legacy markets. I think the volatility is, we're in a new regime, if you want to think of it like that, in terms of legacy equity market volatility.
So, Dylan, I know we're looking at the end game here with what you're sharing on the screen, but I do want to quickly, give a quick shout out to the deep dive, just because, talking about Bitcoin's volatility being driven by the real world, by clown world, that's, I feel like you and Sam and the deep dive team, you're clown world analysts, and you're kind of explaining what's happening with Bitcoin. So, I just want to make sure that people keep an eye out for deep dive. And next week, y'all are dropping another monthly report. I think every single month, y'all kind of summarize everything that's kind of happening in clown world and, put it into context of Bitcoin. So that's something that people should keep an eye out for too. But for everyone in the space, make sure to go over to YouTube. You can see Dylan walking through these charts while he's talking. But yeah, back to you, Dylan.
Clown world analyst. I like I don't know if I like that or not, but we try to contextualize everything with, we'll show you relative kind of Bitcoin market valuations, for example. So we can see the cost basis of every coin on the network on average, right, which is around say 24,000, and we can overlay that with price. And we can see historical relative valuation compared to, if you want to think of it as fair value over Bitcoin's history. And so right now we're kind of in a 40th percentile range of Bitcoin being overly expensive or cheap. So that's one thing we can do. But we also like to say, hey, as much as people don't including myself, I tweeted out a couple of weeks back, I'm like, I don't like how I'm spending my afternoon watching some old guy tell me what he's going to do with the money supply in a suit. But Bitcoin ultimately fixes this. But for the time being, that old guy in a suit matters for capital markets. And so, that's kind of been our focus recently, has been more of this kind of macro driven stuff. But, under the surface, the on-chain accumulation that happens, the hodlers of last resort, whether it's long-term holder supply or supply that's held for longer than a year, I think that's around 60%. We can see these kind of supply squeezes happen in real time. And all that it really takes is that demand to shift, right? That's what happened. There was basically, following the 2017 top, there was 3 years of accumulation and a huge accumulation under the surface in the summer of 2020 when the price of Bitcoin was flat and equities were ripping and everyone was saying, what's happening? In the meantime, there was the free flow to supply was just getting absolutely eaten alive. And it took just one or a couple of catalysts, but it took Michael Saylor coming out and saying, hey, we're on a Bitcoin standard. And then it was basically a total mania because the price went from 10K to 60K in a month or two, or a couple months following I think November, because that supply squeeze had been forming for such a long time. And so we like to monitor that development, but yeah, more so now we're focusing on what's happening in the equity market volatility and credit markets, because I think for the time being, that's the driver in this market. So, if you don't care about any of that, it's great. And we'll say hey, just stack sats, manage your position size. If you don't like volatility, you can't handle it. But for sat stackers, for people that really understand this Bitcoin endgame, this is a pretty good opportunity. And I think it'll get exciting here in the coming months.
Q, do you want to jump in, or should I jump in with the next question? Also, Dylan, the producer is saying to move your camera down a little bit. So I guess Dylan, as you're talking about the end game, potential sell-offs coming, that kind of thing, in order to kind of like clear the ground for the next round of QE. How do you feel about the inflation narrative? Because I feel like it could potentially be at its peak right now, but it seems to continuously escalate. If central bankers were really in control, I'm curious why they're letting it get this far in terms of the narrative. But I guess what do you think of the inflation narrative and how it's kind of developing?
Yeah, I think in terms of consumer price index, we've basically the last 2 decades, more or less, it's kind of been muted because of demographics, but really technological advance kind of stripping away a lot of that cost. So that was a big driver in kind of keeping that CPI at 2-3%, even though if you looked at like broad money supply growth, like M2, which a lot of people say is not the money supply, or it's not inflation, but M2 growth was like, I think 8 or 9% annualized. But where was that money going? It was going in bank reserves, and it was going in debt markets and really financial assets. And so in 2020, when everyone was getting paid to stay at home, basically around the world, we focus on dollar markets, but this is kind of a global phenomenon with fiat currency and competitive debasement. Essentially, the government printed a bunch of money, monetized the debt, central banks and governments' fiscal and monetary policy and coordination, and created a huge, never before seen demand shock. And so we're seeing that play out. And I think, a lot of the stuff that happened in the 2010s in terms of like CapEx cycles, and I'm no expert in commodities, but I think a lot of businesses, a lot of corporates, even households are realizing that that they need to get their hands on like real goods and services that have a production cost, that have a supply chain, that aren't like little trinkets or maybe digital goods. That some of the stuff in the CPI index, like real producer inflation, and it's skyrocketing. It's going through the roof, and you can see that like anecdotally, but also just in the data in terms of like producer inflation and all of that. So I think we could see somewhat of a top form in terms of like rate of change, but I don't suspect that whatsoever for inflation to kind of settle back around 2 or 3%, or kind of the moderation that it was in the past. So regardless, I think negative real yields are here to stay. In terms of how deeply negative, I think that's what we have to watch for, because even like less negative real interest rates can cause this whole kind of debt Ponzi to kind of unwind on itself, and that's what everybody's watching for. So I still wouldn't be holding bonds, as essentially it's a really where we are now is the dollar is kind of a speculation with persistently negative returns, but every once in a while to the upside the dollar increases quite a bit. So like if you want to think of the inverse of every asset, and that kind of credit unwind, Lynn Alden phrases that really well in terms of the dollar being speculative but potentially having upside exposure. That's how I think of it going forward. And so when does that come, at what timeline, with how much kind of velocity in terms of a sell-off, we'll have to wait and see. But the debt situation has never been worse, that's for sure.
Talk to us a little bit. I know in the next that very next tweet that you were sending out, you kind of talk about the one above this one, where with real rates negative, our job is essentially to make sure that we are protecting our capital as best we can. Talk to us a little bit about what the effect of raised rates could have on Bitcoin, given it's been trading in tandem with the markets at large.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in terms of the Fed raising rates, it's not even about the Fed, because the market's doing it for them with inflation. But, will central banks implement yield curve control? Will they come in and say that we're reducing our balance sheet? Will they try to remove mortgage-backed securities and treasuries on their balance sheet? I mean, they say that, that they're jawboning that they're going to do it, but whether they actually get that far is another story entirely. And so, if real yields rise, essentially like all of these things that we're talking about in terms of higher corporate financing costs, lower valuation multiples on everything, debt burdens increase, and it really is just kind of this nasty unwind as fractional reserve house of cards kind of comes down. And so like we're obviously not at that point, but if central bankers said we're never gonna print another dollar. We're never going to monetize another dollar of debt. The end game is that the entire credit system collapses because of how fiat works. Back in, say, in the Great Depression, back in historical debt crises, those claims, those fiat fractional reserve paper claims, could collapse back onto some form of sound collateral like gold, right? There was credit expansion in the 1920s, a huge credit expansion. People were speculating in the stock market, asset markets, and then everything collapsed back down because it was a credit bubble. And what happened was that, there was bank runs and people lost their gold because they thought what they had was a claim on gold, and they did, but it was fractionally reserved. Now there's no backing except for the fiat credit collateral. And so when it's all unwinding, it's just, it collapses. And so that's why the Fed is consistently, or not the Fed, but really central banks around the world have consistently step in and save the system. And we're so far down that path that I think, the whole process of booming and bust will speed up.
So Dylan, talk to us about the quote unquote everything bubble, because I feel like you really set, the stage for that. And then I guess how Bitcoin ties into that, because I feel like a lot of people, when they think of Bitcoin, they're like, oh, Bitcoin's not this real thing. Bitcoin's this magical internet money thing. Bitcoin, it's not the same thing as like a bar of gold. But the kind of the crazy thing about Bitcoin is that, one, it's very real, and it's rubbing up against this kind of fiat central banker paradigm where they think they can just print, any resource into existence, which obviously they can't. But, the marginal cost of production, like you have in this tweet, is trending towards infinity. It really is kind of like this real pin that is kind of forcing the issue in terms of the everything bubble. So I guess, talk about the everything bubble, frame it in terms of like what that means in terms of Bitcoin and Bitcoin hash rate in particular.
Yeah, so I referenced the everything bubble a lot, and it's kind of the core of my personal thesis around Bitcoin. Never mind kind of the technology aspect of it, but Bitcoin is a monetary asset. Why would I say I hold a dominant majority of my wealth in Bitcoin when I think, or partially expect things to unwind? Well, with this much debt in the system, with global debt to GDP around 400%. If you're looking at US, I think it's around there as well. Federal debt to GDP over 100%. We're in somewhat of a debt spiral. So, every dollar in existence was lent into existence and has to be paid back plus interest. And so when you're looking at technological, advancement with and deflating prices there, stripping the cost of everything. If you're looking at demographics being very deflationary over the coming years, we're in a monetary system that requires perpetual credit expansion. Or it collapses again. And so let's if we're phrasing this as binary, which I believe it is, what's the end result? Well, if they don't step in and if there's not perpetual credit expansion, then everything collapses. And in a fiat system with fractional reserve banking, interconnected counterparty risk, the assets that you think are there are not there. The bonds, the credit that is owed to you is not going to get paid back. The stocks that you have are going to go bankrupt. The custodial asset or collateral that you thought you had is going to get liquidated. It's going to get wiped out. The real estate that you own, completely levered up, is going to be defaulted upon. Everything unwinds to zero, and it sounds very doomsday. But imagine if central banks didn't step in 2008 when things were a lot healthier. Well, a lot more people would have been hurt, and honestly, we may be in a more healthy position right now. But the entire banking system was on the verge of collapse. And that's by design. It's a mathematical thing, these deflationary events. And so on the deflationary side of things, well, you're going to want to own something, a couple things, right? Why do you own gold historically in a debt crisis? Well, one, there's not counterparty risk if you hold the gold in your own vault. It's a bearer asset. You can hold the thing, and there's a tangible production cost to it. So it's relatively scarce, right? It's atomically scarce on Earth. And two, it takes a ton of energy and resources and honestly luck to find some gold, right? You have to go dig it, you have to find it. You might not find any. There's a pretty tangible production cost to producing that gold. So you can't devalue someone's wealth arbitrarily with a pen stroke when you own gold in these deflationary debt crises. And so it's a different story, obviously, if that's in someone else's vault. So why Bitcoin? Well, from that side, well, if everything unwinds, you can hold your own Bitcoin keys. One, two, it's absolutely scarce. You can't print more than 21 million Bitcoin. And three, there's a provable production cost, a verifiable one. And if you understand Bitcoin mining, the dynamics of hash rate, and you understand the difficulty adjustment, where the reason supply is inelastic is as the price rises, or even if it falls, as it becomes more and more attractive to mine Bitcoin over time because the price rises, it becomes incrementally that much harder to mine it. Every 10% increase in people, energy expenditure, hash rate, computing power going to mining Bitcoin means that later will come a 10% increase in the difficulty to actually mine it. So the supply inelasticity is a function of the difficulty adjustment. It's the only asset in the world like it. And so because of that, and because of the global financial incentive to basically monetize stranded waste energy resources, but also just any inefficiencies in electrical grids around the world, what you have is essentially a drive towards lowest marginal energy cost to mine Bitcoin, which means that the production cost of one Bitcoin, if there's that drive towards zero, is going to drive towards infinity. And so that sounds really outrageous, but the supply issuance is trending towards zero. The new supply issuance, eventually it'll only be a fee model, and so that marginal production cost will be fighting for a tiny amount of Satoshis, and you're going to have a vast amount of energy expenditure, computational power, and resources set up to try to acquire that stuff. So that's why in the deflationary side, you own Bitcoin. The inflationary side, I think, is much easier. If credit markets continue, perpetual credit expansion, you have to protect yourself against dilution. Okay, how do you do that? Own absolutely scarce asset with a production cost. It's kind of the same story. So on the binary outcome, which is my thesis, people may agree with me or disagree with me, but I believe that the credit system ultimately is a binary outcome of perpetual monetary expansion or a deflationary collapse. And in either scenario, I want to own Bitcoin because I can hold my wealth anywhere in the world, liquid in my head essentially, and I can verify for myself that it'll be there and it's not at anyone else's risk. So I guess that's the kind of dual everything bubble thesis, is that the end game is somewhat binary. I used a picture of an Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail, because as every credit unwind comes, the answer is increasing liquidity injections. But the reality is excess liquidity can't solve a solvency problem. And in a fiat currency monetary system, the whole system's trending towards insolvency. And so, yeah, that's kind of my framework.
Excess liquidity can't solve a solvency problem. I like that. I like that a lot. So would you say you kind of hit on everything in the thread? Yeah.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, I did.
I mean, Q, anything you want to jump on here? If not, I actually kind of have a list of topics I wanted to try to hit on before we hit our time. From recent deep dives, actually, I just kind of went through the past few deep dives that you and Sam produced and pulled out some of the interesting topics there that maybe we can talk about a little bit more granularly. So I kind of want to stick on this topic of Bitcoin difficulty. It's honestly, and maybe you don't have to share your screen here, but it's been incredible to see Bitcoin difficulty smash all-time highs, given everything in context, right? Supply chain constraints, China banning mining, things happening in Kazakhstan and getting crazy in Kazakhstan, things getting crazy in Ukraine. These are major hubs for Bitcoin hash rate. And despite all of that unfolding in the past, year or so, the last 12 months, all of that has happened. Bitcoin mining is smashing all-time highs. So I guess what's kind of your analysis there, and walk us through just how incredible that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. Just if you think about all the kind of the wall of worry that Bitcoin has climbed over the last year, for the longest time, and honestly, I was pretty new to the market when this was the dominant narrative, but it was like, China controls Bitcoin. Maybe not the dominant narrative, but a mainstream narrative. China can, runs Bitcoin. The Chinese government can do blah, blah, blah with Bitcoin. And the Chinese government outright banned miners and it was heavily concentrated hash rate in China, in mainland China. And, within 6 months, all the hash rate completely left, migrated in a decentralized way, and was plugged in somewhere else. And I think a lot of it, the crazy thing is a lot of it's not plugged in yet. From what I'm hearing, and I was just in Austin, Texas at a mining conference. I was talking with a lot of miners in Texas, as well as just in the US. And the story was that, they got a bunch of ASICs and they got more ASICs on the way. The real shortage is rack space, is like almost no one can find places to plug these in. Like even like relatively like high cost power, margins on Bitcoin mining are extremely profitable. A lot of the publicly traded miners have a production cost of around 10,000 per Bitcoin. That's more of an average, but so they're deep in the money. The problem is that setting up the mining infrastructure, whether it's on grid, off grid, all these sorts of things, it's very challenging, and actually, it takes a lot of time to set up. Some of the stuff with like generators, just for instance, for these mining operations, are like, something that can turn this natural waste gas that you can get for free. The energy is free for a lot of these oil and gas producers. They're just flaring it. The lead times on those are a year or two, right? So, for instance, it's really tough. I think Marathon has 5 or 6 exahash of hash rate, which is about 3% of the total network's hash rate on pallets right now, is what I heard. Not sure if that's true, but a remarkable amount of hash rate is still waiting to be plugged in. And so I think, naturally, just that economic incentive is so strong. And eventually, difficulty and hash rate will ratchet up to the point where a lot of these weaker miners will turn off. And that, that's completely healthy. And it kind of that, it's the most pure form of capitalism we've ever seen, right? Just this probabilistic process. And, it's competition in its most pure form.
That's actually very fascinating, just about the fact that they're having such a hard time plugging these machines in. Did they say, or do you fear that sort of those projections of what hash rate is supposed to look like at the end of the year, companies like Marathon and Riot have been very bullish, almost 10xing their hash rate year over year from the end of 2021 to the end of, actually no, by the end of Q1 2023, Marathon will have 10x their hash rate from the end of last year. But if they're having a hard time plugging in, what are some steps that they're taking beyond just trying to, pay higher fees in order to plug in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm no expert in the kind of the mining hosting region. I mean, I have some people that I talk to that definitely know their stuff. But I would just say that, I think these things take time, especially the supply chains and all the disruptions that happened in 2020 didn't help. But I honestly believe that, I was skeptical at first about these outrageous, maybe not so outrageous hash rate projections in 2023. My friends over at Blockware, Will and Joe Burnett, were saying they expected 300 exahash, and Blockware obviously is kind of in the middle of the mining game. They know their stuff. And I thought that was pretty crazy high. And if you're looking at a chart of hash rate, it's just going parabolic. So maybe 300 exahash by the end of 2022 is like bearish, which is pretty crazy. But if you're just looking at like hash price, which is miner revenue divided by hash rate, it's basically how profitable it is to mine Bitcoin. It's still pretty elevated compared to a lot of the levels it was at in 2020, even with the halving and all of that. It's almost double, sometimes close to triple that with so there's room for compressing margins with these miner revenues, but obviously like rising hash rate, declining or stagnant price does put some pressure on revenues and profit margins for these corporate miners or miners in general.
Is there a price point? I believe you've actually shared it in the deep dive in a previous issue, but what is that price level where that cost just becomes it's inefficient and we need to start rethinking sort of the approach or business model of those miners?
Yeah, I'm not sure. And, it varies by miner to miner, company to company, whether their energy costs are fixed or not, or all sorts of inputs. But, the beauty of Bitcoin is that, whether it's a halving event or whether it's, which reduces the number of Bitcoin in the block subsidy, or it's, March 12th of 2020, where the USD price cuts in half by 50%. The efficient miners will continue to mine blocks, will continue hashing, and the ones that won't, unplug. And what happens when they unplug is, well, after 2016 blocks, after around 2 weeks, longer if a lot of miners unplug, difficulty will downwards adjust, and it'll incentivize those miners to find a new home or to plug back in if they can remain efficient. And so, blocks will continue to be mined, and there's nothing that anybody in the world can do to stop that. And because of these incentives, I think that hash rate is going to go up forever, and people think that's crazy, but that's kind of my thesis.
Yeah, I want to jump in there and just say that when the times are bad and difficulty adjusts down, the active miners, the miners that can remain plugged in, are now much more profitable. So the winners win more when kind of times get turbulent, and it's a massive incentive for the people who have to unplug to get back on, because now the incentive is even greater to join, because you can actually acquire more Bitcoin with your hash rate. So it really is just so elegant what Satoshi built. I mean, again, you don't have to ask me how bullish I am on hash rate. So 37 sats is all I have to say there.
I don't think a lot of people understand that meme.
It's okay. It's just an inside joke for me.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just looking at, for example, CK, like every North American miner that you talked to in 2021, when all this was happening in China, it was kind of disbelief at first. They couldn't believe it. They thought it was like a psyop. And then when it actually happened and hash rate fell off a cliff, they were completely pumped, because their share of the Bitcoin supply, their amount of Bitcoin they're mining per day per month just skyrocketed. And it was exacerbated by price, like derivative market liquidations in May, right? That didn't help, right? Because there's a lot of miners that probably could have stayed solvent or profitable, but then price dumped. But there are people out there with no power costs, or even like a negative power cost. They're getting paid like subsidies to plug in, because Bitcoin mining, the active mining, cleans the environment, cleans the air, right? Like for flaring, for existence. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'd have to say about mining.
Yeah, again, if you have any doubt about the Bitcoin network's ability to coordinate, you just look at the hash rate and know that a lot more is coming online. I think Dylan dropped some awesome alpha there from on the ground at the mining conference in Texas last month. But jumping into some more questions. So you talked about volatility a lot, and I know you talked about volatility and liquidity in the thread, but your last article was kind of like dipping into that, and how kind of volatility elsewhere is going to be affecting Bitcoin. Do you want to talk about volatility, in traditional markets, talk about volatility in Bitcoin, how they're tied together, maybe even talk about the dreaded correlation with tech stocks and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at, like, say, if you go to number 18 in the thread, it's Bitcoin VIX, which is the S&P 500 volatility index. It's kind of the standard measure of like risk in the financial system, or risk on, risk off. And then the DXY, the dollar currency index. You can see Bitcoin dumps, Dixie pumps, and volatility skyrockets. Essentially, when volatility skyrockets, that's like the everything bubble that we keep talking about unwinding. So credit selling off, tech or equities across the board, it's just getting sold. There's a bid on the dollar, and so during market illiquidity comes during those times, and Bitcoin is not insulated because of these dollar denominated markets. And so I kind of think that we're in a higher volatility regime. Just looking at some of the corporate credit markets, just looking at like I saw some pretty good traders and hedge fund managers talking about like order book depth and inequities and these sort of things. The trading is pretty crazy recently, and I think because of that, I just remain cautious about short-term Bitcoin price. Does that mean that I'm selling my Bitcoin or shorting it, or dumped it all for fiat? No, because long-term, with an overwhelming majority of my holdings, it's not something I worry about. I have a long time horizon. I have a low time preference. But that doesn't mean that I'm levering long with 3x my stack. It's just like I'm just more so waiting on the fireworks to unfold, and then we'll take advantage from there. But I think that volatility is here to stay, and this unwind of credit that we're starting to see, and central banks attempting to taper into it is going to be really, really interesting, and I think honestly historic.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel, the kind of like approaching with caution, especially, between managing risk between fiat and Bitcoin. I like to stack fiat and Bitcoin simultaneously and then allocate that fiat when I think the price is cheap. So that's been my strategy for a long time, and I'm going to stick to it. To do that, I use, some on-chain indicators and some, price indicators. I like the 200-day moving average a lot. Dylan, I know we got 5 more minutes here. I want to hit on like maybe 1 or 2 indicators or on-chain, on-chain signals that you are looking at, and then maybe we can shill the monthly report a little bit.
Yeah, I guess I just like to look at long-term holder supply, which is more of this like quarter to quarter, year over year long-term indicator, and it's really kind of like forms the base of the supply squeeze that when Bitcoin goes parabolic, it's like we talked about earlier, it's that wall of money hitting a tiny or a small amount of that free float supply, and so that's materializing right now, but we're just not seeing that impulse of demand, and so that's forming under the surface. That's what we're watching. We have, more complicated kind of metrics that can, compare. You can show the cost basis of like short-term investors versus the long-term holders, and see some interesting dynamics there. So we like to map out all that stuff. And really, as something as simple as the Mayer multiple, which is just the price divided by the 200-day moving average, is in a screaming buy. And so it could get more attractive, but, for anybody that was very excited about stacking 60K, then it's no time to get overly bearish. You should just cherish the opportunity. If it goes lower, I think the strategy of stacking fiat and stacking Bitcoin in tandem and waiting for, you'll know when the ultimate buying opportunity comes. And I think we might get that in 2022, but we'll have to wait and see.
Q, any last questions before we talk about the monthly report and wrap it up?
I do kind of want to ask, what are you seeing? I know everyone talks about the Mayer multiple, and there's only so much you could really take from it, but what are your big takeaways when you look at it right now, presently?
Yeah, I'm not even CK. Do you know what the Mayer multiple is at? It was like, what's the 200-day moving average? Probably like, I don't know, 45 or something. So, I mean, the Mayer multiple, I remember tweeting it out. I was like, I hope it gets below
0.76.
Yeah, so below 0.8, historically, like obviously moving average is not anything sophisticated. It's not this proprietary buy the dip indicator, but like, if Bitcoin is the best money ever, and we're just using a simple moving average to chart its price action, well, trading below that, significantly below that, is obviously opportune time to buy, and so maybe it goes lower, but just something as simple as that can be a good indicator for maybe the newer investor when trying to time in or allocate.
The growth investor strategy in me cringes hearing that we need to be buying under the 200-day moving average, but I got to get over that. How many yerba mates have you had today, Dylan?
A couple.
Oh man. All right, y'all. Well, hey, we need a couple of yerba mates to get through the long Bitcoin day. I feel like these are like the dog days of Bitcoin price uncertainty. The days go by a lot faster when it's just mooning. But y'all, it's been fun, always informative, and yeah, I just want to encourage everyone to sign up for the deep dive. Dylan, Sam, dropping alpha, everything that we talked about on this stream is written about in the deep dive and in further depth straight to your inbox. And next week they're dropping their February monthly report. So at the end of every month, all paying subscribers get immediate access to the monthly report, and then free subscribers get access as well. So there is a paid daily tier and a weekly free tier. So no excuse not to get Dylan straight to your inbox. So check out the deep dive. It's pinned to the top. It's pinned to Dylan's Twitter profile as well. So check that out. And yeah, if you are on Twitter Spaces, make sure to catch this every single Wednesday. We've been doing this on YouTube and Spaces on a weekly.
Cool, guys. Thanks for attending. That was fun. And I guess we'll catch you next Wednesday.
See you next Wednesday. See you on the deep dive. Peace.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Let's take a quick commercial break, and we should have Nolan joining us by then for a new episode of the Breakup. If not, you'll just hear me talking for a little bit until he shows up. Stick around, and we'll be back. Hot mic.
So still no Nolan on the stream, but yo, that was fun talking to Dylan. Q, I honestly, I love the deep dive space every single week. It's a lot of fun. You know, for me, it's like you get your macro hit with Fed Watch, and then you get your like your on-chain big picture with Dylan. It's great to kind of have Ansel and Dylan back to back for me. And then, of course, we're always graced by the legendary Nolan, who's dropping knowledge bombs, you know, almost on the daily. But yeah, Q, back to you, man.
No, I mean, to your point, CK, we at Bitcoin Magazine Live, we love to make sure everyone gets a sense of what's going on, big picture, and then narrow it down and bring it always back to Bitcoin. So grateful that you're always able to join us for those segments, and any other segment that you want to come on as he chugs another LeCroix wearing his Perth Heat jersey. But it is everyone's favorite segment. We are joined and blessed by Nolan. It seems like it got like brighter and sunnier in Barbados, man. How's it going?
Yeah, well, it's a little later. You catch whenever we do it later at this time, you catch me as the sun does come on the 1 second. You catch me as the sun comes on the porch. So
well, I love it, and we're excited to have this latest episode of the Breakup. So I will pass it over to you, man.
I think it's my best episode. I think this is the best one I'm ever gonna do. This is it. This is the best one because the world is so fruitful right now. We talked about the Munger virus spreading, the B21 Munger variant. So when you have a hunger to solve something that's a major problem, but you miss the answer right in front of you, that is a Munger for the viewers who are the first time hearing this idea. So today's show actually, you know, it comes a little bit out of yesterday's show when we were talking about Ilhan Omar and what a devastating effect Ilhan Omar's tweet and her ability to be grassroots funded and her tweet about Canada really was, because it's one of these things that's across enemy lines, if you will, and I'll explain that in a second. So today's board, right? So this show's all about relationships. The whole point is to talk about our relationship with money, to compare and contrast the fiat standard and all the financial relationships that come about with that world, and a Bitcoin standard and all the financial relationships we're creating, will create, looking to create, and we contrast them. And in my case, what's really interesting is that I chose this frame of a breakup, and then my old country, Canada, just went completely psycho ex-girlfriend. And I get to like approach all of these relationships that I used to have with my country and just see them in a new light. So it is the golden goose that keeps on honking, Canada, right? For Bitcoin anyway, we just have a ton of great stories about it. So it's not going to be all about that today. Ukraine is a great contrast. We're going to touch on Ukraine a bit again. And really, I think underline how important these past few days have been for Bitcoin and how really close we are right now to a hyper Bitcoinized world. So if you see my little NPC Wojak here, right? This man is living in something called the prison of two ideas. That expression was invented by a fellow named Greg Gutfeld. Greg Gutfeld hosts a show on Fox News in the afternoons called The Five, kind of a comedic show. He's got a former wrestler, a lot of really interesting people. And then he created a nighttime, an evening show to compete with The Tonight Show and all these other ones, you know, Stephen Colbert. Well, it turns out he's the biggest in the world now. He just passed like The Tonight Show and everybody. Like he did it, you know, in September, but already within a couple of days, he was there. Now, the reason I like Greg Gutfeld, he, you know, definitely on the right, let's say, but a lot like Bill Maher or some other folks on the left that are able to transcend the prison of two ideas and see things from the other side from time to time and aren't really caught up in some of the binary type of arguments that politics naturally fall into. And so Greg Gutfeld came up with this really clever way of explaining it, which is the prison of two ideas. And what he basically says is, you know, you get caught in these dichotomies and you don't understand there's actually a million options out there. It's not really black and white, or in this case, blue and red. And what we end up seeing is this prison manifests itself in the way stories are shared online. So these little dots that I have here, the blue and the red, this is a representation of actual statistical amalgamation of data that you can find online. And what it is stories shared within audiences on social media, right? So you'll see people tweet this out sometimes. You'll see people share this, particularly around election time. And what it basically is trying to tell you is that CNN, MSNBC, large viewership, all these little other dots would be smaller publications, generally considered left. What ends up happening here is you're measuring how much it's shared within a circle versus how much it actually makes it to readers on the other side, right? So that's what this graph is often showing. It's the same on the right, right? The prison of two ideas is absolutely not just a left-wing problem or just a right-wing problem. It's the whole thing, right? It's the whole thing. And there's only a few people that are able to transcend that. Greg Gutfeld, Bill Maher, many others out there. It's not many. I wish there were more. I wish there were more. But anyway, there's two. So one of the things that is amazing about Bitcoin is that it can shake the box often and for a brief moment create a crack, create a little sliver of light where people can escape the prison of two ideas, where information can come over the top, an aerial bombardment of truth, which is a little bit what we saw with Ilhan Omar yesterday. But today's news brings a ton of these examples, So the first that I want to underline was from a video today by Sticks and Hammer 666. I don't know if anyone knows who Sticks and Hammer 666 is. A big YouTube personality. He's been around for years. And he did one of his shows. So he does about 5 or 6, 7 videos a day sometimes. Really high output, really high quality YouTube feed. And if you don't follow him, you definitely should. We should get him on the show sometimes. He's been on BitChute, taking Bitcoin for years. Really interesting guy. Now he did a show today, and it's the first one here. So whenever you see this prison of two ideas, and what I'm talking about is that sliver of light, Bitcoin making an exit ramp to get out of the prison of two ideas and to shake the box and see things new for the first time. And one of the ones that I want to mention here, the first one, is the one that Sticks and Hammer mentioned today on politics in Canada. And I'm speaking to a 4chan story that he underlined. The 4chan story is this. Anyone who's aware of Pepe's in Bitcoin remembers that this was deliberately turned as a matter of experiment, really, as a matter of trolling, to turn it into a white supremacist symbol, all in joke, in jest, and in humor. It started on 4chan with a lot of people talking, and then the collection, of course, was a big thing in Bitcoin for many years. Way before there were any NFTs on Ethereum, these Pepe NFTs were big, right? Rare Pepes, people loved them. And people still do love them. And then, of course, the Anti-Defamation League fell for the trap, said, yes, it is a white supremacist symbol. And then it got, sort of tarred that way. Now, the 4chan guys are up to it again. And Yara Sachs, an MP in Canada, didn't understand that this is the way things work. And the 4chan folks decided to make honk honk buy into this narrative that it's a white supremacist symbol or sound. and they started memeing it into existence. And this is really high level trolling, right? To meme something into existence like that. And then for this woman who made a video yesterday in the Canadian Parliament going on and on about how honk honk was a Nazi slogan, but also with HH, right? So the HH part was the big connection. And she did this like it was a huge reveal, and she was this Sherlock Holmes detective, and she'd uncovered it. And as if she was just more serious, you would believe her. Her seriousness was just off the charts. She had uncovered a great crime against humanity, honk honk. And in the end, the video has now been shared widely around the world. And I think it is such an absurdity that it breaks this prison of two ideas. So it's another one of these elements that just comes right over the top, where even now, I know there are enough brain dead people in the world to continue to fall into the prison of two ideas around us. So I'm not saying it's a cure-all. I'm just saying a higher portion of normal saw through the prison of two ideas on this one. A higher portion of normal said, whoa, this is crazy, crazy, right? So it gets even better. There's a Twitter handle that you can follow now, Ottawa Gestapo, and it's sort of like a fake police site giving police updates about what's going on in Ottawa. And they had a hilarious one, so I gotta share it. So interim chief Steve S. Balls tells you what to think about nasty truck protest and why the new and improved police-based occupation is way better. So these guys are just trolling this all the time. And the reason why that's funny, I think funny, is because although the truckers are gone, the police now occupy the downtown of Ottawa. You can't actually go anywhere. And there's a big mall downtown, and a bunch of people said it was open yesterday. They're going to go. But of course, one little thing happened and it turned into a big evacuation situation, high alert. You need to go through checkpoints to get anywhere near Parliament now. And not everyone has access. They turn away journalists, they turn away anyone who just wants to go for a walk. It used to be when I worked on the Hill, you could smoke joints on the Parliament on the lawn in front of Parliament, and no one cared. There was no even police guns. I was in a terrorist attack, an actual terrorist attack once in Parliament, where a guy came in and shot people, killed people, shot the walls, bullets flying everywhere. That really happened, right? But before that, there were no guns on Parliament. Even the guards did not have a firearm. There was no way to do anything like that. Now you can't get anywhere near it. Police everywhere drawing guns and all this stuff. And it's shocking a lot of people. Like a lot of Canadians are shocked by this stuff, especially the people in Ottawa, right? Shocked that this is happening. Now, shocked is one thing. It's another one of these stories that have forced people to exit this two idea prison, right? So it's one of those ones where people have a real experience on the ground and it actually starts changing their mind. Next, banking. This is great. So my former boss, I guess you could say, Jesse Powell at Kraken, and Brian Armstrong of Coinbase founding have been flagged, I guess, red flagged by the OSC. That's the Ontario Securities Commission. It's like the SEC, except for a province. And we don't have a federal securities regulator really in Canada. It's the like banking is the opposite in Canada and the United States. Securities regulations are also kind of the opposite. So in this case, they're mostly provincial. So the Ontario, but it's the same as the New York one in the case of Canada. It's the biggest one. It's the most important regulator for that. So they said that because Jesse and Brian encouraged users to self-custody wallets, that they ought to be flagged and they shouldn't do that and whatever. Of course, this was met by complete derision. You know, people have been self-hosting wallets for a long time. And it happened to come on a day when the Canadian Bankers Association are trying to release this new digital authentication scheme they've come up with. So it's contrasting and definitely popping and forcing people to go, what the heck's going on here? Another one of these ones that sort of breaks the mold. You've got Forbes writing the same thing. A title in Forbes News today: Bitcoin's use case strengthens as Canadian bank accounts get frozen, right? Now, we've seen that banks have stopped seizing accounts, right? So this is news. So as of last night, I guess, Canadian banks said they'd stopped freezing accounts of truckers and people who donated to the protest. To me, it looks like they're getting a lot of complaints about stuff like Forbes being written, as well as what looks like a bank run, right? No one is really able to decipher it, but it looked like a lot of people withdrew money on the weekend when it first was announced. And the data is absolutely not being shared, and the banks do not need to share it right now because they can't be sued. They are completely immune from all legal recourse. But nevertheless, it looks like something's going on, and they've stopped seizing these accounts. Next, deterministic optimism had a really, I think, a perfect way to summarize it. And this is a tweet for him. I don't think they survive this, meaning Canadian banks. Seriously, no sane person or business will ever bank with Canadian banks again, right? Now, even to just cover it real quick, my thoughts are there'll be a judicial review shortly. And the judiciary, the legal system in Canada might be too corrupted. I saw there was no bail for one of the lead organizers of the protest. The judge who did the bail hearing was a former failed political candidate of the Liberal Party and appointed and blah, 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 blah. So if there's any more of that going on, and there's a lot more of that scenario happening in the Canadian judiciary, we'll see. But it looks like that the order is a complete disaster, and that's why the banks have had to go back on it, because they were flagging people for $20. There was no scope to it. There was no degree of size, scale. No one really knows if they're a terrorist or not, right? Like what we've been talking about it. I don't know. Maybe. Am I a terrorist? I'm not sure. Nobody knows, right? Nobody knows. So in this way, the damage is done, right? It's too complicated and murky now, and is forcing a lot of people to exit again this binary of left and right. The next one here is about security. Let me see if this board can be seen everywhere here. So we've got security on the next one, right? Security. Now, the security one with, what we talked about yesterday, is there a war? Nobody knows. I'm not sure what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. But I do know this, Lawrence O'Donnell, who is a host of the news on MSNBC, is one of the dumbest fuckers in the world. I mean, this guy is rock bottom stupid. Let me tell you what he said. And he hosts the news. He had a tweet, 3 lines. Is Putin smart? ? What would make him smart? ? His weak, in parentheses, education ? Okay. Now, we've said on this show before that no one's doubting Putin is stupid. Whether or not he's right or wrong, everyone is questioning that, right? No one is saying he's a good guy, or I agree with everything Putin did, or blah, blah. No one is saying that. No one's even coming close to saying that. What we are saying is he's smart. He's a smart guy, right? And I think Legate Nullis on Twitter put it perfectly. He said, how could a KGB colonel who built his political career during the chaotic aftermath of the fall of the USSR possibly be as smart as political science grads and journalists who have never spoken to anyone who disagrees with them or had to make decisions with serious consequences? And that's really it, isn't it? So you've got this guy hosting the news who's sitting there wondering if Vladimir Putin is smart. Smart. Like, is he smart? Now, this is, in the end, a question of national security at some point, right? It looks like there's a lot of action over there. And the person who's supposed to be telling you what's going on is spending time wondering whether Putin is smart. I mean, is he smart? What difference would it make even? But is that really the kind of thing you should be thinking about in these circumstances? Are you trying to litigate his intelligence as if something would be gained from understanding his exact IQ? I mean, this guy, Lawrence O'Donnell, has a job because he looks serious. Imagine I did this show and I said, today, Ukraine and Russia have a bunch of serious stuff, and they had to go to the business factory to do serious adult things, and it's really adult-like. And if you didn't know how serious it is, it's kind of like the girl who gave the speech with the honk honk, and she'd uncovered it. She's Sherlock Holmes. It's the HH thing from Germany, right? She believes that because she's serious, maybe, I don't want to mind read her, But it seems like the body language is indicating that her seriousness denotes that you must listen and this is what's going on. And this fellow Lawrence O'Donnell, I mean, he must have made a whole career off looking serious and doing the news, reading the news, right? But it turns out he thinks he's smarter than Vladimir Putin, who, if I'm not wrong, is maybe the richest person in the world. I mean, some people think, right? I mean, not the Forbes people who are just looking at your normal money, but he owns a big gas company. I mean, all of the gas companies in Russia, right? He's a rich guy. How rich? Who knows? I don't know, right? But speaking of rich, so this last one here to break our prison of two ideas, it's supposed to be oil drips, and I'm talking about energy. And, you know, here's where we're at on that. In Biden's speech yesterday, he warned energy prices would go up, right? Now, we know the memory hole of most mainstream media readers, listeners is pretty deep. You can throw almost anything in there and never see it again. But this is starting to get pretty obvious for even people who are stuck in this binary thing, because it's going to cost you money, right? Costing you money brings you out of this, right? Real world things in your pocket. And so now we've seen that when Biden warned that the gas prices would go up, we remember now that inflation was, remember, not here at first, it's not there. And then it was transitory. Remember team transitory, right? Who was on team transitory? Then it was the supply chains, right? Supply chains, oh my God, that's what's causing it, right? You remember AOC said, wow, it's the supply, it's really complicated supply chain stuff, right? Oh, but then it was corporate greed. Then it was whatever that, you know, the woman from Massachusetts, the Senator Elizabeth Warren, right? You know, then it was corporate greed. Remember around Christmas, it was corporate greed. They wanted to charge you more for a turkey at Christmas, and that was their big master plan, right? That was inflation. But now it's Russia's fault, right? So cross out all of those other ones, right? But now it's Russia's fault, right? So in the end, the prison of two ideas brings you to a place, and this is the brain damage part, right? This is, and I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding about the brain damage piece, right? If you hold ideas that are so oppositional in your head for long enough, you'll go crazy. And they could be on either end, right? If you're someone who said, I'm a small government libertarian, but then it's like, go to war because I listen to, you know, hawkish, right-wing, warmongering media, right? So holding these oppositional views in your head does a lot of nasty things, right? Causes cognitive dissonance. It causes almost a schizophrenia, right? It can cause that. And this is brain damage, right? I'm not joking, right? So when I see in particular media handling an issue of the complexity of what's going on right now and the window of light that Bitcoin is bringing into all of these issues and the off-ramp that it's providing for people who are rushing out, when I look at all these journalists who have been, I mean, they believe it, right? This isn't a conspiracy. This is clown world stuff. This is stuff they believe in. You get a bunch of journalists that aren't really rich, right? We're wondering if they're having fun staying poor, but the business model sucks. So we know how much they get paid. It's not a lot, right? So are they having fun staying poor, or are they enjoying giving people brain damage, right? Which is it, right? Is it the poor part that's good, or is it the brain damage part? Because either way, I think when we look at things like, even look at FATF again, right? I did one on Hong Kong's birthday, if you remember, on the show a few weeks back. And it was, happy birthday, Hong Kong, you're dead, right? Because Hong Kong really was sacrificed for the purposes of FinTrack and FinCEN and FATF, the main board on top of it, right? The whole excuse that the CEO of Hong Kong used, that's the name of their governor or whatever they call it, a CEO, which I love. That was good Hong Kong. The CEO of Hong Kong, who now reports to China, Carrie Lam, said it's because we can't have extradition, right? The extradition was for money laundering. The extradition was for FATF, FinCEN initiatives. Now, and in the end, we went with it, right? We're like, okay, well, they need extradition. And in the end, it was like, okay, let's sacrifice Hong Kong to appease FinCEN and FATF in Paris and FinTrack in Canada. And now in Canada, we've used the FinTrack, FinCEN provisions to gut the banking sector and probably kill, I mean, probably, you know, the country's in for some misery. I mean, it's in for some misery. It's first one into World War III, first one out, I hope, I think, but they're knee deep right now, going to be neck deep soon. And when you step back for a second and you say, wait a minute here, in order to appease FATF, right? In order to appease FinTrack and FinCEN, we've actually now sacrificed two pillars of Western democratic systems, Hong Kong and Canada, just gone. Just who cares, right? FATF, come on, FATF. FATF, they got goals, man, anti-terrorism, anti-money laundering. Jeez, who cares about Canada and Hong Kong? Shitholes, right? So you'll see things like the New York Times, and everyone's going on about this today, right? The New York Times and how they covered the Indian protests against Modi in early 2021. It was freedom fighters, it was reformers, it was all this stuff. Is it so different in Canada with the truckers? Is it really so different, right? And so people have been sharing that all day today. The New York Times coverage of the India farming protest, and the New York Times coverage of the Canadian truckers protest. The Canadian truckers protest was, you know, sounds good. Get these guys. They're in the way. Bridges, stuff, traffic, no good, right? So in the end, the problem is if you don't take one of those windows, if you don't see the light, you're going to be stuck in this prison of two ideas. And I'm afraid you get brain damage, right? It's actual brain damage. I'm not, no joke, brain damage. So be careful. Got to break up. Got to get rid of this stuff. It's no good. It's no good. Bright sun today.
Awesome, Nolan. Well, thank you for that. I mean, Chris and I were having a good laugh about how my ears perked up when you mentioned that you were smoking weed outside of the Capitol building.
It was very common. It was very common. It was never a problem. I mean, I remember once we had great weather on, and this was before Trudeau was elected to bring it in. And I mean, I remember because I was part of that small part inside the Conservative Party that was an anti-prohibitionist. We were fighting for more liberty. You know, that's how these things camped out, right? It was these little camps. And so, you know, I was always there trying to get that stuff. So we would do a big 420 day on 420 as a political thing. And and I had a meeting in my office, and I was right in the main Parliament office. And I'm telling you, everyone lit up at the same time. I mean, thousands of people because of the weather, thousands. You saw the smoke rise, and I shit you not, it came right into my office. I mean, right into my office. And I, you know, it was great. I had this meeting, I think it was with bankers, you know, and I was like, I don't know, guys, I don't know what to tell you, you know, and I mean, I'm serious. They said, close the windows, hot box it. So even bankers can have a humor, right? They can even have a sense of humor.
That's amazing. I will definitely be banking with the bankers who opted to hotbox their meeting.
No. They'll take your money now. They're not that cool. They're not that cool, you know. They're going to get brain damage though, because they would at once hotbox an office in Parliament and break that law because that was illegal back then. But now take your money out of your bank because, you know, whatever.
Oh, I want to ask you, I don't believe you touched on it, but Trudeau released a statement yesterday, I believe. I mean, I want to believe it was yesterday. We never know sometimes with some of the stuff that circulates social media, where he started condemning the actions of Russia as though they were this.
Yeah. So that was another, like, you got the India thing with the the protests a year ago in the New York Times coverage. Then you have a lot of people sharing that exact image. Russia were, you know, but here's the thing. I think, tell me if I'm wrong, I think Trudeau sanctioned the Canadian people more than Biden sanctioned the Russian oligarchs. I want to hear more about that. You know, I think the sanctions were worse proportionately on the Canadians than they were in the war sanctions against Russia. I think so. He also amazingly met with Biden exactly 1 year ago today for the first time after Biden had taken office. And they did this big, like, you know, we're going to fight for democracy all around the world. It's going to be great. You and me, Joe, great, you know.
Oh, Justin.
We love them. Come on. More, every day more. I want Justin Trudeau only doing this stuff. It's just great. Sad for some of the people who are being affected, and here's one story I want to leave everyone with today, because it's actually, we've been shitting on Canada. Look, some of the dumbest people in the world are from that country, for real. Some of the dumbest. But this is a real thing that happened today. So some of these truckers are stuck in what amounts to refugee camps. There's nowhere to go. They had no money. Everything was frozen. There's just like actual fields, and they don't want cameras there because it's not pretty, right? Some desperation going on. And of course, the CBC state broadcaster drives there today to get their, pathetic pictures of how it all ended up and was it worth it and right? You can already write the piece in your head. But Canada's a treacherous place, and their news van went off the road. Yeah, it went off the road, and one of the truckers towed them out. And the trucker was wearing a defund the CBC. That's a slogan in Canada. We want to defund the state broadcaster. He was wearing a defund the CBC t-shirt. This is good on all ends. It's not just this. I've been saying bad things about the CBC. The CBC picked up the story, took his exact quotes, and said, "I couldn't leave any Canadian like that." That was his quote in that weather, right? They gave like a legit hearing to his, in a couple tweets, but a legit hearing to what he had said. Did not call him like a white supremacist or anything like that. Did a really good job. And I would say both the CBC and, this guy's just a hero, but the CBC, I will give them a pass on this one, right? They don't deserve any of the subsidy and the money, but that was quality work to tell the truth there and not turn that in, because it's got to be bad for the narrative. It's not good for the narrative, right? It's not just like do the right thing. This was like, shit, man, I'm going to hear about this, right?
No, look, I love that story.
Canadians, still.
All you Canadians, you're too nice for your own good. But I do think it's important, like, regardless of differing opinions, regardless of, very well, this reporter and the people in that van probably viewed the man who saved them and many others like him as the bad guys, if you will, the villains of this whole story. But to see the humanity of, hey, I can't leave anyone, Canadian or not Canadian, in a situation like that just goes to show you that we are more alike than we are different.
Absolutely. And the same way Bitcoin provides that magic light and that opening to see out of the prison of two ideas, this kind of stuff can happen every day, and people like this can create those little opportunities where we can break out of the mold.
Yeah, I'm going to admit I definitely screenshotted this from someone else's Twitter, and I'm going to post it to my own Instagram. But there's that meme of Kanye where he just holds up the yellow stationery paper, and the quote on this one is, "The money in your bank account is one state emergency away from being the government's money." And we're witnessing that in real time.
Kanye 2024. Let's get him in there.
And man, that Donda 2 listening party was I actually enjoyed it, minus the commentary that I had to listen over it as my producer.
I heard there was some dark stuff or whatever. I haven't really paid attention, but
all I know is his Kim K diss track was kind of awesome. Because it was all just, dude, you're gonna take my kids away? You're gonna take my kids away? You're gonna regret that. Yeah. You have an enemy now.
Yeah. Well, that's look, he's got more evolution to go, as do we all, but I think whatever he transforms into could be a really powerful force for America and the world. So let's keep our eyes on it.
I agree. I don't know if you had a chance to hear his Joe Rogan interview on the heels of his announcement for.
Yeah. And it was about Bitcoin, right? It was the Harriet Tubman bill story.
Yep. Yeah. There was one quote in particular that has stuck with me to this day, where Joe Rogan asked him, what happens if you're president and one of these foreign countries, whether it's Iran, whether it's Russia, North Korea, they've sent rockets at us, like they are in the air on their way to America. What are you going to do? And I think Kanye West yay, whatever you want to call him, gave the best goddamn answer that I have ever heard anyone say, which he started by saying, I would pray to God. And then I would go and ask the people that I put in those positions to make the right decisions what they think.
Mhm.
No politician is ever going to be that direct in saying, hey,
Mhm.
you know what? No, defense stuff, I don't really know. That's not my expertise. But I will have put in a team in place that is so excellent at that. And I will trust in them and hear what they have to say before making an ultimate decision. No politician ever says something like that.
And that's what I would like for him to do. Like there is no prescribed role of president, right? It was an invented thing from the start. It's organic. It changes. The president as we know it today was mostly architected by Teddy Roosevelt. He insisted on Hail to the Chief to be played when he entered a room, and he was the first president to take foreign trips, in particular to Panama, to take it over to build the canal. And a lot of what we understand of executive power, the trust busting, right? He took the power of his office and went straight after the trusts. You know, there was a power vacuum after Lincoln and the Civil War, and no one wanted a strong president. Very deliberately, no one wanted a strong president. And that's where you got the Tammany Hall and the political organization that created the trusts in the first place, right? Because there was no real president, no one had any idea what to do, right? They knew that Lincoln was too much. Whatever that was good for the Civil War, not going back down that road. And so he came in, Teddy, and created the role. Remember, he comes back, he does the 2 terms, he comes back, he goes to Africa, right, on a hunting expedition, which is where a lot of Smithsonian stuffed animals and everything still come from. He came back and created the Bull Moose Party to fight the creation of the Federal Reserve, which was being done behind his back, right? Because the Federal Reserve, don't forget, is really just the bank trust, right? That's the real name for it, right? It was the bank trust. And the reason why all of that stuff was so secretive was because everyone wanted the trust broken, and no one would have accepted the trust made the law that broke the trust, right? Like that's all it was, right? So, of course, Teddy went nuts. His nephew, right, really creates the modern presidency, right? So really designs and architects what it looks like to this day. And we copied it every generation since and added to it because it was the right institution to win the Civil War or the World War II, and then maybe the Cold War, and who knows. But Obama really became the greatest manifestation of that, but in an extreme way, right? The weighted speech, the expert on every subject, basically, right? Like the opposite of what you just said Kanye would do, right? As far as Obama was concerned, he could figure it all out, right? And I don't mean to, it's not a criticism of Obama in a sense. It's just saying that that was the end of that pendulum. That's why we see what happens with Trump next, which is the beginning of the role changing a lot, right? And I think the TV star part is important because Obama did start that too, right? Obama understood how to communicate almost better than anyone before him. It's just Trump was much better at it.
No, totally.
Obama was good, but Trump was much better at it.
Trump raised the bar on that, absolutely. And I think I'm stuck on this that I want to share regarding Teddy Roosevelt. Yes, he is known as the Trump busting president. However, and my source is John D. Rockefeller's biography, which I highly recommend everyone read. Excellent book. Very long, but not very dense. John D. Rockefeller talks about how he absolutely despised Roosevelt. Roosevelt was trying to break everything that Rockefeller started. He would run on this campaign platform. However, he would literally walk off these stages and Rockefeller would have an agent, someone who worked under him, go to all of these events. And after every one of his speech, where he would literally condemn Standard Oil, he would receive a check from Standard Oil, which is why he actually never broke them up. And it was, I believe, I'm spacing right now on, I think it was Truman. Why? Who came after Roosevelt?
The second Roosevelt.
First.
So, it was the one who created it, Taft.
Taft, yes, thank you. So Taft was the one who
Still
actually
an active family today, by the way.
Really? I did
Yeah.
not realize that. But essentially,
did not
that's why
accept it.
Taft was the one who broke up Standard Oil. And that's why Taft is the one who's credited with breaking up all of those big monopolies, if you will, because Roosevelt was being paid off by them to literally not. So that is also something that,
Yeah, Taft was handpicked by Teddy, but he betrayed him as well, right?
yeah. But that's always something that I think, as much as Teddy Roosevelt did, I don't think it gets highlighted enough that unfortunately he had his hand in a pot that he should not have had.
Yeah, I believe that. Because to me, I've seen that there was murkiness around his abandonment. He basically abandoned and that's, as I understand, why the bull moose fell apart and didn't get over the line, was because he wasn't as sincere but I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert in that period, you know. I
No,
like
mean,
the old Teddy part when he was riding moose and stuff like that, you know.
Well,
riding moose.
the max. So, like, for example, there was no term limit, even when Teddy Roosevelt was president, which is why he was able to run for that third term. And it was
No,
literally,
that's not why. He was vice president and McKinley was assassinated and he took over. And he said, and he only served 3 years of that term. He
Right.
declared it a full term. A big mistake. He said for the rest of his life, he regretted it. He declared the first unelected term a term. So he only got elected president once. So he believed he had the right to run again. And the Republicans disagreed.
I've got to do more digging before I dive into this on the live stream, I guess. But I always was under the impression that it was because FDR was very aggressive on trying to run for a third term, but his party did not allow him to be the nominee. And then on the heels of that was when they introduced a maximum 10 years.
Well, that's true. That's true. But it was still a custom.
Right,
They only did it
right.
because the custom was broke. He would never, it was always known you did not go past George Washington.
Right.
And so what he was doing was a trick. He was saying, I only actually was elected once.
Right.
Because of the ascension to the office. But he regretted that forever. I mean, that was, there's some sad stories towards the end of his life when he's begging Woodrow Wilson to participate. He's begging himself to be reinstated in his colonel or whatever ranking to go fight the Kaiser and in World War I. And they would laugh at him. They would tease him with it. They'd invite him in just to laugh and let him down because he was a bit like a child about it, right? He was like kind of a Trump guy, right? Like, you know, there was no like hidden part to him, right? It was all out there. And if he wanted something, he was going to be a beast on it. And so, you know, he would beg, and they would just laugh at him. And as I understand, it's because his big regret in all of that, his big, you know, masochism of all that was, I shouldn't have said that. He always would come home to Sagamore Hill saying, I shouldn't have given up. I shouldn't have left the office. And But it could be propaganda from, you know, some biography I read.
Unfortunately, we live in a time where we have to question all of our sources, including us here on
If
Bitcoin
you thought the
Magazine
news
Live.
was fake, wait till you get a load of history.
On another time, I will talk to you about my whole theory of history is written by the winners. But until that day comes, I am going to wrap up today's stream because we have been on for almost 4 hours now. I appreciate everyone who has been tuning in from start to finish. Nolan, thank you for yet another incredible episode of The Breakup. For everyone who has been living under a rock or maybe didn't catch it the 20 times before we mentioned it, Bitcoin 22 is going to be in Miami, April 6th through the 9th. This is the largest Bitcoin event in the world. You will regret not being there. If you want to work in Bitcoin, I highly recommend you come to shake hands, show face, and meet people because there will be a job fair. There's going to be representation from every single company in the Bitcoin space at this event. Use code YTMAG, get 10% off. If that's not enough for you, if you buy with Bitcoin, you will get 33% off. Go ahead, buy the ticket, just do it. And while you're at it, stack some sats, be well, and we'll be back tomorrow. Thank you all.